Clara Whitmore slapped the gold coin off the counter so hard it rang across the floorboards, and the whole store went dead quiet. "Say that again," she said. "Say it to my face." The stranger didn't blink. "Marry me." "I don't know your name." "You don't have to, but your brother's got 4 days before that doctor walks away, and we both know it." Her hands started shaking. Because he was right. And nobody in Red Hollow was supposed to know. Before we go on, please subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end, because what this cowboy is hiding will break your heart before it heals it. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The coin rolled. That was the thing Clara remembered for the rest of her life. Not his face, not his voice, but the sound of that gold coin rolling in a slow, wobbling circle across the floor of Hobson's general store, while 11 people held their breath. Mr. Hobson bent down and picked it up. He was 61 years old, and he had never in his life held that much money in one hand. "That's real," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "I know what it is," the stranger said. "I'd like it back." Hobson didn't give it back, not right away. He turned it over, bit down on the edge of it like a fool in a story, and looked at the man's cracked boots and his split leather coat, and the way the hem of it had been sewn back on by somebody who didn't much care how it looked. "Where'd a man like you get a coin like this?" "Earned it." "Doing what?" "Working." Clara found her voice. She was surprised to hear how steady it came out, because inside her chest something had come loose and was banging around like a bird in a chimney. "Mr. Hobson, give the man his money." Hobson gave the man his money. The stranger set it back on the counter, right where it had been, right in front of Clara, like the last 2 minutes hadn't happened at all. "Marry me," he said. "Same offer." "It doesn't get better if you wait." Somebody laughed. It was Del Ruggard standing by the stove with his hands in his pockets, and it was the kind of laugh a man does when he wants the room to laugh with him. Nobody laughed with him. "Clara," Del said, "you want me to run him off?" "No. He's making a fool of you in front of everybody." "Then everybody can go home," Clara said. "Nobody's stopping them." Nobody went home. She had lived in Red Hollow, Montana for 27 years, and in all that time she had never once asked a soul for help. Not when her mother died. Not when her father followed 9 months after coughing into a rag he tried to hide from her. Not when she was 19 and the bank sent a man out to the house with a folded piece of paper and a face like a closed door. She had a brother, Toby, who was 11. She had a needle and thread and a pair of hands that had gotten fast in the way hands get fast when there's no choice about it. That was the whole inventory of her life, and the town had watched her carry it. That was the part people didn't understand about Red Hollow. It wasn't that they were cruel. It's that they had made her into a story they told themselves: the Whitmore girl, don't she work hard? Don't she never complain? And a story doesn't need help. A story just needs to keep going so folks can feel warm about it. Nobody brings soup to a story. So when the stranger said, "I know your brother is sick," the bird in her chest went wild. "Outside," she said. "All right." "Not you." She turned. "Everybody else. Outside." Hobson opened his mouth. Clara looked at him and he closed it. Del Ruggard took his time about it the way men do when they want you to know they're choosing to leave, and then it was just the two of them, and the smell of coffee and kerosene and the little tick of the stove. Clara put both hands flat on the counter to keep them still. "Who told you about my brother?" "Nobody told me." "Somebody told you, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. You walked in off the road and you said my brother's name." "I didn't say his name." That stopped her. He was right. He hadn't. He'd said your brother. He hadn't known the name. Then how? "Doc Prentice." The stranger's voice didn't change at all. 2 hours ago, outside the livery. He was talking to a man named Ruggard about a bill he can't collect. He said he'd given a family until the end of the week, and after that he had to think about his own children. Regard said, and I'm quoting him, "She'll never ask you for a thing, Doc. That's her whole problem." Clara's ears started ringing. They talked about me on the street. They did. In front of a stranger. Men don't count a poor man as a person, he said. It's the only useful thing about being one. She sat down. She hadn't meant to. There was a stool there, and her legs just found it. "Get out," she said. "Miss Whitmore." "Get out." He got out. He didn't leave town. That was the first thing that made her furious. If he'd ridden off, she could have hated him clean the way you hate weather. Instead, he put his horse in the livery and paid cash and sat on the bench outside the church like a man with an appointment. And by 4 o'clock, every woman in Red Hollow had walked past that bench twice. At 5 o'clock, Toby found out. "Is it true?" He was standing in the doorway of the back room with his shirt buttoned wrong and his hair stuck flat with sweat, and he was 11 years old, and he weighed as much as a bag of feed. "Prue Hobson says a man asked to marry you, and you knocked his money on the floor. Get in bed." "Did you, Toby?" "Because if you didn't knock it on the floor, I did." He came all the way in. He had their father's eyes, which was a cruel joke God played about twice a day. "Why? Because you don't take money from men who won't say where it came from. You take money from Mrs. Ostrander and she's mean. That's a wage that's different. Get in bed." He got in bed. But he didn't stop looking at her, and after a minute he said the thing that took the floor out from under her. "Clara, I heard Doc talking to you last Thursday, through the wall." She didn't move. "I'm not stupid," Toby said. "I know what 4 days means." She went out at 7 o'clock in the cold with her coat buttoned to the throat, and she walked to the church bench, and he was still sitting on it. He stood up when he saw her. He did it fast without thinking about it, and it annoyed her that she noticed. "Your name," she said. "Ethan." "Ethan what?" There was a pause there. Half a second. She'd sewn for 20 years. She knew what a stitch looked like when it skipped. "Callahan," he said. "Ethan Callahan." "Yes?" "Where from?" "West of here." "That's not a place." "It's the only answer you're getting tonight." She laughed. It came out ugly. "You want me to marry you, and you won't tell me where you sleep. I'll tell you exactly where you'd sleep. A room with a door that locks from the inside, and I'd never have the key. Your brother sleeps in the room next to it. There's a doctor 40 minutes away who's been paid for a year in advance whether he's needed or not." He said it flat, like a man reading a list. "You can leave any day you want, and the doctor stays paid. That part doesn't change. That's not a hook." Clara stood there in the dark and felt something worse than anger. She felt tempted. "Why?" she said. "And don't tell me love, because I'll walk away right now and you'll never see me again." "It isn't love." "Then what is it?" "It's arithmetic," Ethan said. "I need a wife. Not a woman, a wife on paper with a name on a line. There's a reason, and I'm not going to tell it to you tonight. You need money you'd rather die than beg for. I'd rather give it to somebody who'd rather die than beg for it, than to somebody who'd ask me twice a day for the rest of my life. That's the coldest thing anybody's ever said to me." "Yes?" "Why would that make me say yes?" "Because," he said, "you've been lied to warmly your whole life, and it never once put food on your table." Jim, she was quiet for so long a dog started barking 2 streets over and quit again. "Show me the coin," she said. He gave it to her. She held it up to the church lamp. It was heavier than she expected. Everything about him was heavier than she expected. "A man carrying this," she said, "doesn't have boots like yours." "No." "So you're a thief?" "No." "You're a liar then." Ethan Callahan looked at her for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice was different, lower, and for the first time not entirely under his control. "Yes." Clara's hand closed around the coin. "About what?" "Ask me in 3 days," he said. "If you still want to know in 3 days, I'll tell you every word of it, and you can hate me with the whole story instead of half of it. And if I don't like the story, then you'll take this doctor and the year and go, and I'll have deserved it." She didn't sleep. She sat up in the chair by Toby's bed with the coin in her fist until the edges of it printed into her palm, and around 2 in the morning, Toby's breathing went thin and whistling, and she had to sit him up and hold him through it, and his hands gripped her sleeves like he was drowning, and when it passed, he was too tired to be embarrassed. "Clara, don't talk. If a man's willing to help—" "Toby, I swear to God." "Then it's not up to you," he said. "It's my lungs." She put her forehead against his hair and didn't say anything for a while. "You're 11. I know how old I am." A long, rattling breath. "You always say you'd do anything for me, but there's a thing on the table and you won't do it. Because I don't know what he wants." "So ask him," Toby said, and he was crying now and mad about crying, which made it worse. "You ask everybody everything. You asked Mrs. Ostrander what her dead husband weighed so you could cut the coat down. Ask him."
Amen.
At 6 in the morning, Clara Whitmore walked into the livery, and Ethan was already awake, already saddling, and she knew right then he'd been planning to leave. "You were going to go." "Sunrise," he said. "You said no." "I didn't say no. You knocked my money on the floor." "That wasn't no. That was how dare you." She stepped in out of the cold and shut the door behind her. "Sit down." He sat down on a hay bale like a man who'd been ordered around before and had made peace with it. "Conditions," Clara said. Something moved across his face. If she'd known him better, she'd have called it relief. "Say them." 1. I'm not a possession. You don't tell me where to go, who to talk to, or when to be quiet. If I want to walk into a town and buy a newspaper, I buy a newspaper. Agreed. 2. I'm not a decoration. I don't stand at your elbow while men talk business over my head. If it concerns my life, I'm in the room. Agreed. 3. Her voice caught, and she hated it, and she pushed through. You don't touch me. Not until I say. And if I never say, then never. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even blink. Agreed. You didn't think about it. I didn't have to. Most men would have. I'm not most men, and neither are you, Ethan said. 4. She hadn't expected him to ask for a fourth. It knocked her off her rhythm, and she said the true thing instead of the safe one. 4. When you tell me the truth in 3 days, tell me all of it. Not the part you think I can carry. All of it. I've been protected my whole life by people who thought they were being kind, and every single one of them left me with less than I started. There was a silence in that livery so complete she could hear the horse chewing. That's the only one I'm afraid of, Ethan said. Why? Because I can keep it, he said, and it'll cost me more than the rest of them put together.
Gasha.
The doctor was paid at 9. She watched him do it. That was her condition, and she'd meant it. If it concerns my life, I'm in the room. And so she stood in Doc Prentice's front room while Ethan Callahan counted out money on a table, and she watched Prentice's face go from confusion to greed to shame in about 4 seconds flat. Now hold on, Prentice said. This is more than, it's a year. The boy might not need a... He stopped. He'd heard it out loud. Say the rest of it, Doc, Clara said. Prentice went red. Miss Whitmore. No, say it. You were going to say he might not need a year. You were going to say that in front of his sister. She was shaking. She'd been shaking for 18 hours. You've been to my house 40 times. You ate my bread. You put your feet on my father's stove. And yesterday, you stood outside the livery and told Del Ruggard you had to think of your own children. That is a private. Nothing about me has ever been private in this town, Clara said. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. You all watched. For 9 years, you all just watched and told each other what a strong girl I was, and it cost you nothing, and you got to feel good. Nobody said anything. Ethan very quietly put one more coin on the table. That's for the year after, he said. In case. Doc Prentice looked at the money and then at Clara, And what was in his face wasn't anger anymore. It was something a lot worse. It was gratitude. He was grateful to the stranger for making him a decent man again with money. Clara walked out and threw up behind the woodpile. They married at 11 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, in a church with 9 people in it, none of whom were there for her. Reverend Toll read it fast, like a man clearing a table. When he got to lawful wedded, he actually looked up at Clara over the top of the book, one last chance. One raised eyebrow. Are you sure? And Clara held his eyes and said, I am. She surprised herself. She'd meant to just say, I do. Toby was in the front pew, wrapped in 3 blankets. He was the only one smiling. Afterward on the steps, Del Ruggard caught her arm. Clara, let go. I've known you since you were 7 years old. Let go, Del. He let go. But he leaned in and said it low, so only she'd hear, and years later, she'd still be able to hear it exactly. Everybody in this town is going to say you sold yourself. And Clara Whitmore, who had never once in her life said an unkind word she couldn't take back, smiled at him. Del, she said, everybody in this town watched me starve politely for 9 years. They don't get an opinion about how I stopped. They left at dawn the next morning. A wagon for Toby packed with straw and blankets and every quilt her mother ever made. Clara rode beside it. Half the town came out to watch. Not to wave. To watch. She didn't look back. She wanted to badly, and she didn't, and Ethan noticed because he noticed everything. You can look, he said 3 miles out. No, I can't. Why not? Because if I look back and see them standing there feeling sorry for me, Clara said, I'll turn this wagon around and burn that store down. Ethan laughed. It was the first time. It was a startled, cracked open sound, like it had been a while, and he seemed almost as surprised by it as she was. She filed it away. Duh. She started counting things. That was the second day. Toby was sleeping in the wagon, and there was nothing to do but ride and count, so Clara counted. She counted that Ethan Callahan pulled the wagon off the road at exactly the hour Toby's cough got bad every day, without being asked, without ever once saying, I noticed. She counted that he never let her hand him anything. He always took it from where she set it down a beat later, so their fingers never touched. She counted that when they passed a homestead, he lifted 2 fingers off the reins, and every single time the man in the field lifted 2 fingers back. Strangers don't get that. You know them, she said. No. They know you. They know the horse, Ethan said, which was, she realized much later, the single most honest lie he ever told her. On the 3rd night, a man tried to rob them. He came out of the dark by the fire with a pistol and a bad plan, and a voice that hadn't finished changing yet. 17, maybe 18. So scared his teeth were going. Money, he said. The you got money, I know you got. Clara's whole body locked. Toby was 6 feet away in the wagon, and Ethan Callahan didn't stand up. He stayed sitting. He put both hands flat on his knees where they could be seen, and he said in a voice so calm it was almost gentle, When'd you eat last? The boy's gun wavered. What? When'd you eat? That's don't, I'll shoot you. You won't. You've got the hammer down. Ethan tilted his head. Son, I've been you. Sit down and eat, and in the morning I'll tell you where a man'll hire you and not ask questions. Or pull that trigger and find out what kind of night this turns into. But make up your mind because my wife's brother is sick and the noise is bad for him. My wife's brother. Clara felt it go through her like cold water. The boy sat down. He ate 2 plates. He cried a little at one point and pretended it was the smoke. And at some point he looked across the fire at Ethan with his mouth full and said the thing that changed the whole road. Mister, you ain't broke. Ethan didn't answer. You ain't, the boy insisted. Broke men flinch. You didn't flinch. He wiped his mouth. My daddy was broke. Broke's a feeling. You ain't got it." Clara looked at her husband of 3 days across the fire. Ethan Callahan was staring into the flames, and his jaw was tight, and he didn't say one word. She waited until the boy was asleep. 3 days, she said. Ethan closed his eyes. Clara. You said 3 days. It's 3 days. I know what I said. Then say it. He got up. He walked to the edge of the firelight and stood there with his back to her, and she thought he's going to lie, and she got ready to feel it. My father died 4 years ago, Ethan said. She hadn't expected that. I'm sorry. Don't be. Not yet. You don't know what he was. He was quiet a second. He left me something. It's big. It's bigger than you're picturing right now, and I'm asking you to understand that I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it because you're going to see it in 2 days, and I need you not to hate me in the first 10 seconds. Clara's hands went cold. How big? 2 days. How big, Ethan? He turned around. Big enough, he said, that there's a woman in this territory who spent 11 months telling me she loved me, and then put her hand on my chest one night and said, and I remember it exactly, I could learn to love this place if you'd just make it easier. And I said, love me first. And she said, his voice went strange. She said, that's the same thing. The fire popped. Her name was Victoria Hale, Ethan said. And when she left, she took a piece out of me I have never once gotten back. And the piece she took was the part that could tell the difference between somebody looking at me and somebody looking at what I've got. I can't tell anymore, Clara. I'm not able. I'm like a man who's gone deaf, and everybody keeps saying, just listen harder. Clara stood up very slowly. So you found a woman so desperate, she said, that she'd say yes before she could see it. Yes. You didn't want a wife who'd love you. You wanted a wife who couldn't have been lying because she said yes to nothing. Yes. His voice broke on it. Yes. That's it. That's exactly it. That's the whole ugly thing, and you got there in 4 seconds, and it took me 4 years. Ethan, I bought proof, he said. That's what I did. I couldn't earn it, so I bought it, and I told myself it was a fair trade because you needed the money, and I needed and it is a fair trade on paper. It's a fair trade. And I have never in my life been so ashamed of anything. And then he said the thing. And the worst part, Ethan Callahan said, is that it worked. Because you're not what I thought I was buying. You're not grateful. You're not quiet. You made me sit on a hay bale and read me conditions like I was a hired man, and nobody has ever... He stopped. Say it, Clara whispered. I liked it, he said. God help me, I liked it. And now I've got a wife who's going to look at me in 2 days and know I'm a coward and I can't unbuy it. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then Clara Whitmore, who had never asked for a thing in her life, sat back down by the fire and said, Sit down. He sat. I'm going to tell you something and you're going to let me finish. Her voice was very steady. You didn't buy me. You couldn't have. Not with that coin, not with 10 of them. If you'd come to my door with $100 and a kind face, I would have shut the door on you because I've had kind faces at my door my whole life, and every one of them was there to feel better about themselves. Then why? Because you told me the arithmetic, Clara said. You stood in the dark and you said it isn't love, it's arithmetic. And Ethan, that was the first honest sentence anybody in Montana has said to me in 9 years. He stared at her. That's not a reason to... It's the only reason there is. She wrapped her arms around herself. You want to know what I'm afraid of? I'm not afraid you're rich. I don't care. I'm afraid you're kind. Because a kind man who lies to protect you is the exact thing that killed my mother and my father and damn near killed my brother. Everybody protecting me. Everybody deciding what I could carry. And I looked at you in that livery and I thought this one's different. This one told me the cold, true thing to my face. Clara, so here's what happens now. She looked up. You don't get to protect me, ever. Not once. Whatever's in 2 days, you tell me before I see it, because if you let me walk up on it, and be surprised if you make me be surprised. I'll tell you. Say it like you mean it. I'll tell you, Ethan said. Tomorrow, before the ridge. I'll stop the wagon and I'll say every word of it and you can decide with your feet. All right, all right. And they sat there. Two strangers who'd been married 3 days at a fire in the middle of nothing, and neither one of them moved for a long, long time. Toby woke up an hour later. He'd heard everything. Of course he had. He was 11 and the wagon was 6 feet away, and children are the best liars and the worst sleepers in the world. He waited until Ethan walked off to check the horses. Clara, go back to sleep. He's rich. Toby, he's rich and he's sad about it, Toby said, marveling. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. And Clara laughed. Really laughed, the first one in years. The kind that hurts. And then she cried, and Toby patted her arm with his skinny, cold hand and said, There. Like an old man like their father used to, and that made it worse and better at the same time. Clara. What? Are you going to like him? I don't know. 'Cause I already do, Toby said. And I'd like a warning if I'm wrong. In the morning, the boy who'd tried to rob them was gone before dawn. He'd left the pistol on Ethan's saddle, unloaded, with the 6 bullets set beside it in a neat little row and scratched into the dirt underneath in letters a 17-year-old could manage, sorry. Ethan looked at it for a while. You're going to find him a job, Clara said. Already did. Wrote it on a paper and put it in his coat while he slept. He picked up the pistol. There's a man named Samuel'll take him on. Won't ask a thing. Samuel who? Ethan opened his mouth. And that was the moment. That was the exact moment, and Clara saw it happen. She watched her husband come right up to the edge of a name and stop the way a horse stops at water it doesn't trust. Ethan? Tomorrow, he said. The ridge, I promised. You just did it again. I know. He shut his eyes. I know. Clara, I've been hiding for 4 years. It's not a decision anymore. It's a flinch. Give me till the ridge. She should have pushed. She'd think about that for the rest of her life. She said, till the ridge. They rode all that day. He was different, quieter. Twice she caught him looking at Toby in the wagon bed with an expression she couldn't read. And once she caught him looking at her, and he looked away so fast it was almost funny. At noon they passed a rider going the other way, a man with a good coat and a good horse and a hard face, and the man reined up sharp and stared. And Clara watched that stranger's eyes go over Ethan's cracked boots and his split coat and land on his face and go white. The man didn't say a word. He turned his horse and went back the way he came at a gallop. Clara's throat closed. Ethan. I saw. He knew you. He did. Who was that? Ethan Callahan watched the dust settle on the empty road, and when he answered, his voice had gone somewhere. She'd never heard it go somewhere old and cold and tired. That, he said, was a man who's going to reach the valley before we do. Is that bad? That depends, Ethan said, on which of the 2 things he tells them. He put his heels to the horse. Ethan, which 2 things? Ride, he said. Please, just ride. And Clara Whitmore, 27 years old, 3 days married with her sick brother in the wagon behind her, and a gold coin in her pocket, and a husband whose name she was beginning to understand she did not actually know rode. They rode until the horses were lathered and Toby was coughing so hard Clara had to hold his head, and Ethan Callahan did not say one more word about the man on the road. She tried 3 times. Who was he? Ride. Ethan. Ride. The 4th time she didn't ask. She just pulled her horse up short in the middle of the road and sat there. And after about 40 yards, Ethan realized he was alone and turned around. Clara. No. We don't have time for this. That's the first true thing you've said in an hour, she said. We don't have time, so stop spending it. He came back. He walked his horse right up alongside hers, close enough that she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, and for 1 second she thought he was going to shout at her, and part of her, a part she wasn't proud of, wanted him to. She'd have known what to do with a man who shouted. Instead, he said quietly, "If I tell you now, you'll turn around." "Then I'll turn around. With your brother in that wagon." And there it was. Clara felt it land, and she felt her whole body go still and cold because she knew exactly what he'd just done. He hadn't threatened her. He'd never threaten her. She'd have bet her life on it by then, and she'd have won. He'd just held up the arithmetic. The same arithmetic he'd handed her in the dark outside the church, and she had loved him for it then, and she hated him for it now. And they were the same sentence. "You said that on purpose," she said. "Yes." "You want me to know you'd say it?" "I want you to know I'd rather you hate me at the top of that ridge," Ethan said, "than lose you in the middle of a road with nothing settled." "That's not your choice." "No, it isn't." He gathered the reins. "But it's still what I want. A man's allowed to want a thing he doesn't get." And then he rode on, and after a minute, because Toby was coughing, because the light was going, because there was nowhere on God's earth to go, but forward, Clara followed him. She would think about that later too. How easy it was. How a person could be furious and obedient at the same time. And how those two things, living in one chest, is the exact place where a marriage either grows or rots. The storm came at dusk. He'd called it at 2 in the afternoon. She remembered because she'd laughed at him. He'd looked up at a sky that was, as far as she could tell, the same blue it had been all day, and he'd said, "We need to be off this flat by 6. And she'd said, "It's clear," and he'd said, "It's clear now." At 6:15, the sky turned the color of a bruise, and the wind came across that grass like something with a grudge, and Ethan Callahan put the wagon in the lee of a rock shelf he found in the dark without slowing down, like a man walking into his own kitchen. "How did you know that was here?" "Ride." "You knew it was here." He was already unhitching. He didn't answer, and he didn't answer for the next 3 hours because for the next 3 hours, Toby Whitmore tried to die. It started as the usual, the thin whistle, the grabbing at her sleeves, and then it went somewhere Clara had never been. His lips went the wrong color. His eyes rolled up and came back and didn't find her. And Clara heard a sound she didn't recognize, and understood distantly that it was coming out of her own mouth. "Get a pot," Ethan said. "He's not—" "Clara, pot, water, now." She moved. Later, she'd remember that she moved before she decided to, and that was a thing she'd never done for any man in her life. He built a fire under that rock shelf in a wind that should have made it impossible, and he did it in about 90 seconds, and he did it with one hand while holding her brother upright against his chest with the other. He got the water going. He tented a blanket over the boy's head and the steam, and he held Toby's shoulders, and he talked the entire time, not to Clara, to Toby, in a low, flat voice, with no fear in it anywhere. "Breathe out first. Out, not in. I know you want in. Out first, son. There you go. Out. That's it. Again." "He can't." "He can. Out, Toby. Slow. You're all right. Nobody's dying tonight that's not on the schedule. Out." And Toby breathed out, and then in, and then out again, and the whistle broke, and the boy made a sound like a sob and started to cry, and Ethan Callahan held her brother in the dark and said, There, see, told you, wasn't on the schedule." It took 20 minutes for Clara to be able to speak. "Where did you learn that?" Ethan didn't look at her. He was smoothing Toby's hair down over and over the way you gentle a horse. "Ethan, where did you learn to do that?" "A man I knew had a boy with bad lungs." "What man?" "Clara." "What man?" And Ethan Callahan said, "My father." And then he shut his mouth so hard, she heard his teeth click, and she understood she'd gotten one word more than he'd meant to give. And there would not be a second. She sat awake all night, with her back against a wagon wheel, watching her husband sleep, sitting up with his hand still resting on her brother's chest, so he'd feel it if the breathing changed. And she thought, "I don't know a single true thing about you except this." and she thought this might be the only true thing there is. And then she thought about the coin and the doctor and Doc Prentice's grateful, shameful face, and she thought, "Or you're the best liar I've ever met, and this is just what expensive looks like when it's kind." Morning came gray and rinsed. Toby woke up hungry, which she'd learned to read as a miracle, and ate like a wolf, and then announced with the ruthlessness of an 11-year-old, "Ethan, you were crying." "I wasn't. You were." "That was steam." "That's what I said last time, and you said it wasn't steam." Clara watched her husband lose an argument to a child and try very hard not to smile about it, and she felt something move in her chest that she did not want and could not stop. They were on the road by 7. They met the riders at 10. There were 4 of them coming down out of the north on horses that had cost real money, and Clara's stomach went to water because she'd been raised on stories about what 4 men on a road can mean, and then Ethan did something that stopped her heart worse than the men did. He straightened. That was all. He didn't reach for anything. Didn't speak, didn't change his face. He just sat up in the saddle about an inch, and something came into him that Clara had never seen in the 6 days she'd known him, and the 4 riders, men with good coats and hard hands, men who could have ridden them down like rabbits pulled up, and took off their hats. All 4 of them. Clara heard herself say very quietly, "Oh." The oldest one nudged his horse forward. He had gray in his beard and a face like a boot. "Sir?" "Samuel. Marcus Hale come through the valley at sundown yesterday. Rode straight to Holloway's man and then straight out again. I know. I passed him. He says he saw you on the Cutbank Road." Samuel's eyes went for one flick of a second to Clara and then back. "He says you weren't alone." "That's right." "Sir?" "Samuel. He's told Holloway there's a woman." And Clara watched Ethan Callahan close his eyes. Just for a second. Just for one breath right there in the middle of a road in front of 4 of his own men, her husband closed his eyes like a man who's been hit and is deciding whether to go down. Then he opened them. "Then Holloway knows," he said, "and we can stop pretending." "How long?" "He'll have men at the gate by tomorrow noon, his lawyer inside of a week." Samuel hesitated. "There's more." "Say it." "Miss Hale's at the house." Nothing happened. That was the thing Clara noticed. Absolutely nothing happened. Ethan didn't flinch, didn't breathe wrong, didn't so much as blink, and the very completeness of that, nothing told her more than a scream would have. "Since when?" Ethan said. "Tuesday. She come with a trunk, sir. She's got the blue room." "Who let her have the blue room?" "Nobody let her, sir. She took it. Mrs. Fay tried." Samuel's mouth twisted. "You know how that goes." "I do." "You want me to put her out?" "No." "Sir, I'd enjoy it." "I know you would," Ethan said. "No." And then Samuel turned in the saddle and looked full at Clara for the first time. And Clara Whitmore, who had faced down the entire town of Red Hollow 4 days earlier, without blinking, felt her face go hot under the gaze of a foreman on a horse. "Ma'am," Samuel said. "Sir?" "That your boy in the wagon?" "My brother." "He sick?" "Yes." Samuel nodded once slow. Then he said to Ethan without any change in his voice at all, "You told her yet?" And Clara's whole body went cold. Ethan said, "At the ridge." "That's today." "That's today." "Then I'll get out ahead of you," Samuel said, and he turned his horse, and just before he went, he did a thing Clara did not understand for another 2 hours. He looked at her one more time, and he touched his hat brim, and he said, "Welcome home, ma'am." She didn't have a chance to ask. They rode. An hour out from the ridge, Ethan stopped the wagon. He did it on a bare stretch with nothing around, no trees, no shelter, nothing to look at but each other. And Clara understood that he'd chosen it on purpose, and she thought with a kind of terrible tenderness, "He wants there to be nowhere for either of us to look." "Get down," he said. "Please." She got down. Toby in the wagon said, "Should I?" "Stay," Clara said. "You'll hear it anyway." "Yeah," Toby admitted. Ethan stood about 6 feet away with his hat in his hands, and he did not look like a man who had 90 minutes earlier made 4 grown men take their hats off. He looked like a boy about to be whipped. "I'm going to say it wrong," he said. "Say it anyway." "I'm rich." Clara waited. "That's it?" "No." "Then keep going." "I'm Clara." "I don't know how to make the word mean what it means." He was struggling. She'd never seen him struggle with words. He'd been so exact with her every time, and now he was fumbling like a man with cold hands. "You're going to look at that ridge and hear that word, and they're not going to match up. That's why I'm doing this out here. So you hear it once from my mouth before your eyes make it a lie." "How rich?" "Over that ridge," he stopped. "My father put together a valley. There's a creek runs the length of it, and everything for 11 miles either side of that creek is ours. 14,000 acres deeded, grazing on more. 400 head this season. That's a bad year. We've run 12. There's a house." "A house?" "It's not a house," Ethan said. "That's the part I can't say right. It's a house the way a cathedral's a room." Clara stood very still. "How many people work for you?" 91. 91? 140 in the fall. "Ethan?" Her voice came out strange. "You have boots with holes in them." "Yes." "You slept on the ground for 6 nights." "Yes." "You let Del Ruggard laugh at you." "Yes." "You let me buy the coffee," Clara said. "And that was the one that did it. That was the stupid small one that cracked her open. In Ashfork at that counter, you let me put down 11 cents I didn't have, and you thanked me." "I know." "Why?" "Because I wanted to see if you'd do it," Ethan said, and his voice was wrecked. "And you did it. And you didn't make a thing of it. And I've had 4 years of people making a thing of everything they ever handed me, and you put down 11 cents for a stranger with holes in his boots and didn't say one word about it, and Clara, I could have laid down in that road." She turned away from him. She didn't cry. She'd like it on the record if anyone ever asked that she did not cry. "Is that all of it?" she said. And Ethan Callahan said, "No." "Then say the rest." "At the ridge." "You said—" "I know what I said, and I'm breaking it," he said. "And you can hold it against me for the rest of my life. But the rest of it is a thing you have to be looking at to believe, and if I say it here, you'll think I'm insane, and I need you to see the ground when I say it." "Ethan." 1 hour, he said. 1 hour and then everything, and then you can go and I'll pay for the road. She got back on the horse. That was the answer. She didn't have a better one. The ridge came up under them slow, the way big things do. And Clara had spent that whole hour building a picture in her head. A big ranch she'd decided, a fine house more than she'd ever had. Something that would make her feel small, and then she'd get over feeling small because she'd gotten over worse. Then they came over the top, and Clara Whitmore stopped breathing. She would try for years afterward to explain it to people, and she never once managed it. The trouble was that everything she had in her head to compare it to was small. Red Hollow was 2 streets. Her whole life had been measured in the distance between her house and Mrs. Ostrander's and back. And what lay under that ridge wasn't bigger than Red Hollow the way a barn is bigger than a shed. It was bigger the way the ocean is bigger than a bucket. It went to the horizon and then it kept going, and the horizon was just where her eyes gave out. There was a creek in it like a silver thread. There were cattle on it like scattered pepper. There was a house down there, and she thought it was a town. She actually thought it was a town. For 3 full seconds, Clara looked at the Callahan house and thought, "Oh, there's a village," and then her mind caught up, and something in her chest folded. Toby said, "Clara." She couldn't answer him. Clara, is that his—" She turned around in the saddle. Ethan was already looking at her. He'd been looking at her the whole time. He hadn't looked at the valley once she realized that later, and it took the legs out from under her. He'd sat there on that ridge with 14,000 acres under him, and he had watched her face the entire time, like a man reading a verdict. "Who are you?" Clara said. "Clara, who are you?" And for the first time since he'd walked into Hobson's store and put gold on the counter, Ethan Callahan looked afraid. Not the way men look afraid of losing money. She'd seen that in Red Hollow. That was a small, mean, scrambling look. This was different. This was a man looking at the one thing left in the world He could still lose. "My name is Ethan," he said. "I know your name is Ethan." "My name is Ethan Callahan Whitmore." The wind kept blowing. The cattle kept moving. Somewhere down in that impossible green, a dog was barking, and Clara heard it, and she thought absurdly, "That's a long way for a dog to bark." "Say that again," she said. "Clara, say it again." "Whitmore," he said. "My name is Whitmore. Callahan was my mother's name. My father was Josiah Whitmore, and he built every stick of what you're looking at, and I've been riding across this territory for 4 years telling people, I'm Ethan Callahan because Callahan's a name a man can put down." Clara's hands were dead on the reins. "That's my name." "Yes." "That's Ethan, that's my father's name, that's my brother's?" "Yes." "Are we—" And her stomach turned over so hard she thought she'd be sick. "Are we kin?" "No." He was off his horse before she got the word out, up beside her, one hand gripping her stirrup leather like he could hold her on the earth. "No, Clara. No, not one drop. Not a cousin, not a— I checked 3 times. I hired a man in Helena and paid him to prove it, and he proved it. No." "Then why?" And Ethan Callahan Whitmore said the thing that ended the first part of her life. "Because your father's name is on my land." Clara got down off the horse. She didn't remember deciding to. She was just suddenly standing on the ground with her legs shaking and the reins still in her fist. "What did you say?" "In 1859 my father needed water," Ethan said. He was talking fast now, the way a man does when he's been holding a thing so long it comes out under pressure. Government wouldn't let one man file on the whole creek. Law set a quarter section to a settler, that's also every big outfit in this territory did the same thing. They found men. Honest men mostly. Friends. A man would file a claim in his own name and hold it and hand it over later, and everybody shook on it, and that's how every big ranch in Montana got built, and it's how ours did. And my father wasn't proud of it, and he never once lied about it. "Ethan, 6,000 acres, he said. The middle 6,000. Both banks of the creek top to bottom, the heart of it. Without that water, everything you're looking at is a desert in 9 years, and the man who filed it, the man whose name is on that title in the Helena Land Office to this hour, was Amos Whitmore." The dog was still barking. Clara could still hear it. She thought that was the strangest thing, that a dog would just keep barking. "My father," she said. "Your father." "My father was a Ethan. My father died in a rented room. My father coughed up blood into a rag because he wouldn't buy handkerchiefs. My father took wages from Cal Hobson for hauling flour. I know. You know. Clara. You know." And now she was shouting, and Toby was staring at them from the wagon with his mouth open, and Clara didn't care. "You knew my father's name was on 6,000 acres of the richest land in Montana, and you let him haul flour. He wouldn't take it." That stopped her cold. "What?" Ethan's chest was going like he'd run up the ridge on foot. "My father tried," he said, "for 9 years. Clara, I have the letters. There's a box in that house with 31 letters in it, and every one of them is my father asking Amos Whitmore to come and take what was his, and every one of them's got an answer, and the answers are all the same, and they're all no. That's a lie. It's in his hand. You'll know his hand. That's a lie. My father would never—" And then her voice ran out, because Clara Whitmore had just heard herself, and what she'd heard was my father would never turn down help. Her father, who never asked anybody for a thing, who taught her not to, who sat in a rented room and coughed into a rag and would not. "Oh, God," Clara said. "Clara." "Oh, my God." "Clara, listen." "Don't touch me." He didn't. He stepped back so fast he nearly went down, hands up, and at the speed of it. The fact that he honored the third condition in the worst minute of her life, without 1 second of hesitation. That was the thing that kept her from getting on that horse and riding until it died. She stood there a long time. "Say the rest," she said finally. "Clara, you don't have to hear it today. Say the rest, Ethan. You promised me all of it, and you have never once given me all of it, and I am asking you." And Ethan Whitmore stood on that ridge and gave her all of it. "Richard Holloway found the title 6 months ago," he said. "I don't know how. He's got men in the land office. That's not a mystery, that's just money. And he worked out what I've known since I was 19 years old, which is that my father built a kingdom on a handshake with a dead man, and the handshake isn't worth a thing in a courtroom. And the only thing standing between Richard Holloway and this entire valley is the signature of Amos Whitmore's heir." The wind took her hair across her face, and she didn't move it. "Me?" she said. "You. And Toby. You're of age. He's not. It's you. So you came for me?" "Yes." "You didn't ride into Red Hollow?" "No." "You didn't happen to be standing in a store?" "No." "You hunted me," Clara said. "You found out my name, and you found out where I lived, and you found out my brother was dying, and you stood outside a livery and let a doctor say it in front of you, so you'd have a lever." "Yes. Say it like it's yours." "It's mine." Ethan roared, and Toby jumped, and the horses went sideways, and Ethan Whitmore stood there in the wind, with his hands open at his sides and every wall in him down at once. "It's mine. All of it. I found you. I paid a man to find you. I knew your brother's name before I ever walked in that store, and I didn't say it because I wanted you to think I'd guessed. I stood outside that livery for 2 hours waiting for Prentice to come out, because I knew what he'd say. I picked the coin because gold makes a sound in a quiet room. I picked the boots, Clara. I let the leather go. I let a man laugh at me in front of you because I wanted you to see me get laughed at. Every single thing that has happened to you in 6 days I did." Clara couldn't speak. "And every word I said was true," he said, and his voice broke all the way through. "That's the part I can't. Clara, that's the part. I didn't lie to you once. Not one time. I built it out of true things. The arithmetic was true. The doctors paid. The lock's on your door, and I don't have the key, and I never will. I never said one false word to you in my life, and I still did this, and I don't know what that makes me." "It makes you good at it," Clara said. He took that like a fist. "Yes," he said. "Every honest thing you told me was holding up the lie. Like studs in a wall. You didn't lie to me, you framed me." "Yes. You let me stand there by that fire and tell you that you'd said the first honest sentence anybody'd said to me in 9 years, and you let me say it. I know. You let me thank you for it." "Clara, why didn't you just buy it?" she screamed at him. "You had a coin. You had 91 men. I was starving, Ethan. I was starving. You could have walked into that store and put down $200 and said, 'Sign here,' and I'd have signed my own name off the earth and thanked you for the pen. Why didn't you buy it?" And Ethan Whitmore said, "Because then you couldn't stop me." Clara went absolutely still. "What? If I'd bought the title," he said, "it's mine. It's done. You go back to Red Hollow with $200 and a dead man's land in your pocket, and in 6 months you're poor again, and I own the water, and there's not a thing on this earth you could ever do about it." He was shaking. "I married you. Clara, do you understand what I did? Your title's still yours. It's in your name. It's in your name right now, and it stays in your name. And I put a ring on you in front of 9 people and a preacher and made you the one person alive who can take this valley away from me, and there is nothing I can do to stop you." Silence. "I handed you the knife," Ethan said. "That's the whole crime. I lied about the road, and then I put the knife in your hand, and I stood here and told you where my throat is." Clara heard the dog barking a long way off in a valley that belonged to her father. "Why?" she said. "Because I couldn't stand it any other way." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got," he said. "Because Victoria took the part of me that could tell the difference, and I couldn't buy it back, and I couldn't earn it back, and so I built the one situation in the world where a woman couldn't be lying to me. And then I got a woman who could ruin me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I keep Clara. I keep hoping you won't. And that's the first honest hoping I've done since I was 23 years old." Nobody said anything for a long, long time. Then Toby's small voice from the wagon. "Clara, I want to go home." And Clara Whitmore looked down at the biggest thing she had ever seen at 14,000 acres and 400 head, and a house like a town, and a creek like a silver thread running through 6,000 acres of her father's name. And she said, "Toby, I think we're standing on it." She rode down. That was the thing she never explained to anybody either, that she got on the horse and rode down. Not because she forgave him, not because she believed him, because Toby's lips had been the wrong color 18 hours earlier, and there was a doctor 40 minutes from that house, and paid for a year, and because a woman who has spent 9 years choosing between pride and her brother's lungs does not develop a taste for pride. The gate had a man on it. The man took his hat off. The road in was 2 miles. There were people on it. By the time they got to the house, there were 40 of them standing out from the barns and the bunkhouse and the smithy, not cheering, not waving, just standing the way people stand when something they'd stopped expecting comes back. An old woman came out onto the steps in an apron and put both hands over her mouth. "Mrs. Fay," Ethan said. The old woman didn't answer him. She came straight down the steps and straight past him like he wasn't there, and went to the wagon, and she looked at Toby and she said, "How long's he been like that?" 4 years, Clara said. "He eat when he can." "He'll eat," Mrs. Fay said, in the voice of a woman announcing weather. And then she turned around and looked at Clara, and her chin went just once, and she said, "Ma'am, I'll have him in a warm bed in 10 minutes, and I'd take it kindly if you'd let me." And Clara, who had not let a single soul on God's earth help her carry that boy in 4 years, heard herself say, "Yes, please." Mrs. Fay called 2 men over. They lifted Toby like he was made of glass. He looked back at Clara over the man's shoulder with enormous eyes, and Clara nodded at him, and he went. And then she was standing in front of that house alone. Samuel came up beside her. He had his hat in his hands. "Ma'am, don't." "I'll say it anyway," Samuel said. "This morning I said welcome home. I want you to know I wasn't being clever." Clara turned and looked at him. "You knew," she said, "about my father." "I knew Amos Whitmore," Samuel said. "I dug post holes with him in 61. The ground moved. You. He was a stubborn old son of a bitch, and I loved him," Samuel said. "And when he wouldn't take this valley, Josiah cried about it, sat in that house and cried, ma'am, and I ain't ever told a living soul that. And I'm telling you now because you look like you need one thing today that ain't a lie." Clara couldn't feel her hands. "Why?" she said. "Why wouldn't he take it?" And Samuel opened his mouth, and a voice from the porch said, "Ethan." Everything stopped. It was a beautiful voice. That was the first thing Clara understood, and she understood it with a clarity that was almost restful, the way you understand a diagnosis. It was a low, warm, unhurried voice, and it had never once in its life had to be loud to be listened to. Clara turned around. The woman on the porch had come out with no hurry at all. She wore gray, and gray was the wrong color for her, and she'd known it and worn it anyway, which meant it was right. She came down 2 steps and stopped, and she looked at Ethan Whitmore, the way you look at a room you used to live in. "You cut your hair," Victoria Hale said. "It's terrible." Ethan said, "Get off my porch. I've been here since Tuesday. Nobody's put me off yet." Her eyes moved unhurried over the wagon and the dust and the 40 people standing there watching, and then they came to rest on Clara, and stayed. Clara stood in a borrowed coat with 9 years of red hollow on her boots and her brother's blood on her sleeve, and let herself be looked at. "Well," Victoria Hale said pleasantly, "you must be the seamstress." "You must be the seamstress." 40 people heard it. That was the thing about the yard at the Whitmore place. It was big enough to hold 100 head, and quiet enough to hold a whisper, and Victoria Hale had spent enough time on that porch to know exactly how far her voice carried. Clara looked at her. She was aware of a great many things at once. That her sleeve had her brother's blood on it. That her boots had been resoled twice. That there was a woman on those steps in a gray dress that had cost more than the wagon Toby had just been carried out of, and that every single person in that yard was waiting to see what happened next, and that whatever happened next would be told in the bunkhouse for 20 years. She had exactly one thing. She'd been laughed at before. "Yes," Clara said. "I am." Victoria's eyebrows went up half an inch. "I'm sorry." "I'm the seamstress." Clara pulled her coat straight. 9 years, mostly mending. Some cutting when the work was there. Your dress is French, and the hem's been let down twice, which means you've owned it 4 years at least, and you've lost weight in the last one. She looked up. You'd want that taken in at the shoulder before you wear it again. It's pulling. Somebody in the yard made a sound like a cough. Victoria Hale's face didn't change, but she was quiet for a full second, and Clara, who had spent 9 years reading people's faces to learn what they could afford, understood that she had just been handed something and would only get it once. "Ethan," Victoria said without turning. "Where on earth did you find her? Get off my porch." "You keep saying that." Samuel. "Sir?" "Miss Hale's horse." "Already saddled, sir. Been saddled since Tuesday." And there it was, the first laugh. From over by the smithy, one bark of it quickly swallowed. Victoria heard it. Clara watched her hear it, and watched something come into that beautiful face that was not embarrassment at all. It was worse than embarrassment. It was patience. "You're going to want me here by Friday," Victoria said. "I'll wait in Ashfork. There's a hotel." "Then wait in it." "Ethan?" She came down the last step. She was close enough now that only the three of them could hear her, and she dropped her voice into something that was almost kind, and Clara found herself hating that voice with a suddenness that frightened her. "Richard has the statement. The signed one. He's had it since April, and he's been sitting on it because he wanted you to do something stupid first, and darling." Her eyes flicked to Clara. "You have done something magnificently stupid, and I came 400 miles to tell you so before his lawyer did." Ethan said nothing. "Ask me why," Victoria said. "No. Ask me why I'd ride 400 miles for a man who won't let me stand on his steps." "No. Because Marcus signed it," Victoria said, and Clara watched her husband, the man who had held a boy's chest through a storm and never once flinched, the man who had made 4 riders take off their hats without moving a muscle. She watched him take one step back. "Say that again." "My brother signed Richard's statement," Victoria Hale said, "in his own hand, swearing he was in the room in 1859 when Amos Whitmore took $1,100 from your father and signed his interest away. And Marcus was 9 years old in 1859. Ethan, he was 9, and he signed it anyway, and I've been in that house alone with that for 3 months, and there is no one else on God's earth I can tell." Nobody moved. Then Clara said, "You're Marcus Hale's sister." Victoria turned. "Yes, the man on the road, yesterday. Good coat, gray horse, went white when he saw my husband and rode off like the devil had him." "That's Marcus." "He rode to Holloway." "Of course he did." Victoria's mouth did something bitter. "He's owned. He's been owned since he was 22 and a card table in Helena, and I have spent 11 years pretending that isn't so." "And you," Clara said, "are you owned?" The whole yard heard that one too. Victoria Hale looked at the seamstress in the bloody sleeve for a long moment. "That," she said, "is a better question than anyone's asked me in a decade." She picked up her skirt. "I'll be in Ashfork. Friday, Ethan, not a day later." She walked to the horse. And Ethan Whitmore said, "Victoria." She stopped. "Was any of it true?" Clara didn't breathe. Victoria Hale stood there with her back to them, and when she answered, her voice had lost every bit of its music. "All of it," she said. "That's why I left." And she rode. Clara didn't sleep in the house that night. She meant to. Mrs. Fay showed her the room, a room with a lock on the inside and no key on the outside, exactly as promised. And Clara stood in the doorway of it and could not make her feet go in. It was too big. That was all. It was a room the size of the house she'd been born in, and there was a bed in it with 4 posts, and Clara Whitmore stood there in the door for a full minute, and then said, "Where's my brother?" "2 doors down, ma'am." "I'll sit with him." "Ma'am, there's a girl for that." There's not, Clara said. Mrs. Fay looked at her a long moment. She was 60-some and built like a fence post, and Clara would learn in time that she had buried 2 husbands and a daughter, and had never once been late with a meal. No, Mrs. Fay agreed. There's not. So Clara sat in a chair beside her brother in a house like a town, and around midnight, Toby said without opening his eyes, "It's too quiet." "I know. There's no wagon noise." "I know." "Clara." He turned his head. "Is he bad?" And that was the question, wasn't it? That was the whole question, and an 11-year-old had cut straight to it in 4 words, while she'd been circling it for 6 hours like a dog that can't lie down. "I don't know," she said. "You always know." "Not this time." Toby was quiet. Then, "He knew about my lungs before he ever saw me." "Yes." "He got the doctor paid before you even said yes." "Yes." So he was going to pay him either way. Clara opened her mouth and stopped, because she hadn't thought of it. Not once. In 6 days of turning that man over in her hands like a coin, she'd never once turned him over that way, and now that Toby had said it out loud, it sat in the middle of the room and would not leave. "He paid Prentice at 9 in the morning, Toby said. "You married him at 11. That doesn't mean... It means if you'd said no at 10:30, I'd still be paid for." "Toby, I'm just saying what happened," Toby said, and went back to sleep like a child because he was one. Clara sat in that chair until the window went gray, and she thought about a man in cracked boots buying insurance on a boy he'd never met against the chance the boy's sister would tell him no. She found the letters at 4 in the morning. She wasn't looking for them. She'd gone downstairs because she couldn't sit anymore, and there was a room off the hall with a desk in it, and on the desk there was a wooden box with a brass hasp, and it was not locked, and it had been set out square in the middle of the desk, the way a man sets a thing out when he wants it found. Clara stood over it for a long time, then she opened it. 31 letters. She counted them because counting was what she did with her hands when the rest of her was falling. 15 in a big square hand she didn't know. 16 in a small cramped one she did. She'd have known it in the dark. She'd known it since she was 5 years old on the flyleaf of a Bible on the back of a feed bill on a note left under a plate that said "Gone to Ashfork back Thursday. Be good." Clara Whitmore sat down on the floor of a stranger's house and read her father's handwriting for the first time in 9 years. Josiah number "I thank you and I mean it but no." A. Whitmore. That was the whole letter. 2 lines. She turned it over and there was nothing on the back. The next one was longer. Josiah. You keep asking and I keep telling you. It ain't mine. I put my name on a piece of paper for a friend because he needed it, and I didn't need anything, and that's all that was. And if I take 6,000 acres for it, then it wasn't a favor. It was a sale, and I don't want to have sold you anything. Don't ask me again. A. Clara made a sound. She put her hand over her mouth and made it anyway. The 10th letter was from 1868, and it said, "Josiah, I heard about the boy. 9 years old is a hard age to lose your mother. Tell him it don't get better, it gets different, and different is enough to live on. As to the other thing, no. A. The boy. Ethan. Ethan at 9. The 19th letter was 1871. Josiah Bess is sick. Doctor says a year maybe. Don't send money. I mean it. If you send money, I will burn it in the yard and let the neighbors watch me do it. A. Bess. Her mother's name was Bess. Clara sat on that floor with her mother's name in her hands. The 24th was 1873. It was short, and it was crooked, and it was written by a man whose hands didn't work right anymore. Josiah. I know what you're doing. I know Hobson's paying me more than the work is worth, and I know where it comes from. Stop it, or I'll quit the job, and then where are we? I'd rather be poor honest than rich by a trick. Don't you dare tell my girl. A. Clara read it 4 times. Then she got up, and she walked out of that room, and she walked down a hall in a house she didn't know, and she opened a door without knocking. Ethan Whitmore was sitting on the edge of the bed with his boots still on. He hadn't been to sleep either. She threw the letter at him. Don't you dare tell my girl, Clara said. Don't you dare tell my girl." Ethan picked it up off the floor. "Yes." "So you didn't." "Clara, 9 years." Her voice cracked open. 9 years. Ethan and you knew, and your father knew, and Cal Hobson knew. Cal Hobson knew. That man watched me sow for 11 cents an hour, and he knew my father owned the water on 14,000 acres. Hobson didn't know why. He knew enough. "Yes," Ethan said. "He did. And you let it stand." "I was 19 when my father died," Ethan said, and he stood up. "Clara, I was 19 years old and my father put that box in my hands and said, 'This is a debt and it's yours now.' And then he was gone and I had 91 men and 400 head and a valley. I couldn't run, and a debt to a dead man's daughter I'd never met, and I did nothing about it for 4 years because I was a coward, and because it was easier, and because every single day I woke up in a house I only owned by a handshake." "Then why now?" "Because Holloway found the title." "So it was fear," Clara said. "That's what it was. Not honor, not your father, not one word of that you wrote into Red Hollow because a man in Helena found a piece of paper and you were scared." And Ethan Whitmore said, "Yes." She hadn't expected it. She'd braced for the fight. She had it built and loaded. She'd been building it since the ridge, and he took it away from her by simply agreeing, and Clara stood there with a swing that had nowhere to land. "Yes?" he said again. "Fear. I'm not going to dress it. My father asked me 31 times in letters, and once with his own mouth on the last day of his life. And I did nothing, and then a lawyer scared me and I got on a horse in 4 hours. That's who I am. That's exactly who I am, and you can put it on my stone." Clara sat down on the edge of a chair because her legs had quit. "Then why the boots?" she said. "What?" "The boots, the coin, the whole Ethan. If it was fear, if you just wanted the signature, you had a lawyer. You had money. You could have sent a man to Red Hollow with a paper and $200, and I'd have signed it before he finished the sentence. Why the boots?" Ethan didn't answer for a long time. "Because I read the letters," he said. Clara looked up. "I read them every year," Ethan said. "Every year on the day he died, I sat in that room and I read 31 letters from a man who wouldn't take 6,000 acres because he didn't want to have sold a friend a favor. And Clara, I've had 400 men work for me, and I've met governors, and I've had Victoria Hale tell me she loved me for 11 months. And in 28 years, the only person I ever heard of who couldn't be bought was your father." His voice went thin. "And he had a daughter. And I thought if there was one more like him on this earth, then I wanted to know before I put a paper in front of her. Because if you'd taken $200 from a stranger without asking a question, then he was just a stubborn old man, and the world's what everybody says it is, and I'd have had my signature and nothing else. And if I hadn't, you didn't. Answer me." "You knocked it on the floor," Ethan said. "Clara, you knocked gold on the floor in front of 11 people, and you were starving and your brother was dying, and you knocked it on the floor and made Cal Hobson give it back to me, and I stood there in that store and I thought, oh." He was gripping the letter so hard it crumpled. "Oh, there's 2 of them." The house was very quiet. "That's not a reason to test a starving woman," Clara said. "No, it isn't." "You put my brother on a scale." "Yes." "Say the number, Ethan. How much was it worth to you? Say the number." "There isn't one." "There's always a number." "There isn't one," Ethan said, "because it was never the land." Clara stopped. "What?" "It was never the land." He said it, and then he looked like a man who'd cut himself. "Clara, if you'd taken the $200, I'd have paid it and rode home and had my valley, and I'd have been fine. I'd have run it 40 years. I'd have died rich. That's not the thing I couldn't stand." "Then what was?" "That there was nobody," Ethan said. And Clara Whitmore, 27 years old, sitting on a chair at 4 in the morning in a house like a cathedral, watched a man she'd been married to for 6 days finally tell her the truth underneath all the other truths. "Nobody in the world," he said. "That's what Victoria left me with. Not a broken heart I could have carried, that people carry that. She left me knowing knowing that everybody's for sale, and it's only ever a question of the figure and Clara that is a disease. You can't live in it. You look at Samuel and you think, what's his number? You look at Mrs. Fay putting a plate down and you think, what's hers? You look at a man's face when he takes his hat off and you think, he stopped and his mouth twisted. That's $140 a season, and a bunk that's all that is. And it eats you. It ate me for 4 years. And then I read 31 letters, and I thought there might be one in the world. And he was dead, but he had a girl. Clara couldn't speak. I didn't ride to Red Hollow for a signature, Ethan Whitmore said. I rode there to find out if the world was worth living in. And then you knocked my money on the floor and told everybody to go home, and I have been trying to catch my breath ever since. Somewhere down the hall, a clock struck 5. That's a terrible thing to put on a person, Clara said. I know. You made me evidence. I know. I'm not evidence, Ethan. I'm a woman who couldn't feed her brother. I know, he said, and his voice broke all the way. I know. I've known it since Ashfork. I've known it since you put 11 cents on a counter you couldn't afford, and I've been sick with it ever since, because you're not a test. You're a person, and I made a person into a test, and there isn't a word for what that makes me, and I've looked. Clara stood up. She walked over to him. She stood close enough to hit him, and he didn't move, and they stood there like that for a while. Give me the letters, she said. They're yours. All of them. The box. It goes in my room. Yes. And Ethan. She looked up at him. Don't you ever test me again. Not once. Not a little one. Not a kind one. Because I'll know. I believe you. I'm not finished. Her jaw was shaking. You want to know if I can be bought? Fine. Here's the price. The next time you're afraid of me, the next time you look at me and think, what's her number? You come and say it to my face, and I'll answer you, and it'll cost you nothing but the shame of asking. That's the whole price. That's it. But if you arrange one more thing, Ethan, if you build me one more true little room to walk into, I will take that title to Helena myself and hand this valley to Richard Holloway with a bow on it, and I will not be sorry. Ethan Whitmore stood there and took it. All right, he said. Say you understand. I understand. Now say the other thing. What other thing? Whatever you were going to say at the Ridge and didn't, Clara said. You've got one more. I can see it on you. You've had it on you since the fire. And Ethan opened his mouth and somebody hammered on the front door hard enough to rattle the glass in it. Holloway's men were early. There were 9 of them at the gate, and it was 6 in the morning. 6 hours before Samuel had reckoned, and they had a lawyer with them, and the lawyer had a leather case, and Clara Whitmore stood on the porch of a house she'd slept one night in and watched 91 men come out of the barns without being called. Sir, Samuel said. Say the word. No word. Sir, they're on the road. They're on a public road until the second gate, and they know it, Ethan said. Nobody touches anybody. Nobody so much as spits. That's what he wants, Samuel. He's got 9 men and a lawyer, and he'd trade all 9 for one of ours throwing a punch in front of a witness. Samuel's jaw worked. Yes, sir. Pass it. Yes, sir. And then Ethan turned around and said, Clara, go inside. The whole porch heard it. Clara looked at him. She watched him hear himself. She watched it hit him about a half-second after it left his mouth. Watched his eyes close. Watched his hand come up. Don't, she said. Clara. You wrote it down, she said. In a livery. On a hay bale. Condition 2. If it concerns your life, you're in the room. He said it like a man reciting a verse he'd been beaten with. Yes. Then say it right. Ethan Whitmore stood on his own steps in front of 91 men and said, Mrs. Whitmore, that lawyer's here about your father's land, and I'd be a fool to meet him without you. Will you stand with me? And Clara said yes. And out in that yard, somebody she never found out who, though she suspected for the rest of her life that it was the Smith, said quietly, Well, hell. The lawyer's name was Pell, and he had a soft handshake, and he did not offer it to Clara. Mr. Whitmore, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Richard Holloway, and I'd prefer this be civil. Then be civil. May we sit? No. Pell smiled like a man who'd been told no before by richer men. Very well. He opened the case. Mr. Holloway has acquired by purchase and assignment the beneficial interest in 6,040 acres, presently held in the name of one Amos Whitmore deceased. He has a sworn statement establishing that Amos Whitmore conveyed his interest for valuable consideration in 1859. He has the consideration receipted. He has a witness. And he has, I'm afraid, a great deal of patience. He held out a paper. That's a courtesy copy. He'd like the creek. He'd like the valley. He'd like the creek, Pell said pleasantly. The valley is what happens after. Clara took the paper. Pell's hand hesitated a half-second before he let go of it, and she saw him decide it didn't matter, and she filed that away for later the way she filed everything. She read it. And then Clara Whitmore said, Mr. Pell, what's a quitclaim? Pell blinked. I'm sorry. It says here, quitclaim of all right, title, and interest. What's that mean? Madam, I'm not able to advise. I'm not asking for advice, I'm asking what a word means. She looked up. You put a word on a paper about my father. You can tell me what it means. Pell's smile got thinner. It means a man gives up whatever claim he has without warranting that he has any. Thank you. She read on. And valuable consideration, that's the $1,100. That's correct. Receipted where? I beg your pardon. Receipted where? Clara said. You said Mr. Holloway has the consideration receipted. A receipt's got a place on it. Where'd my father sign for $1,100? Pell said, Helena. And Clara Whitmore said, my father never went to Helena in his life. The yard was so quiet she could hear the creek. Madam, he never went, Clara said. Not once, not for anything. He wouldn't get on a train, and he wouldn't ride 4 days from my mother. And I know that the way I know my own name, because when she was dying, he wouldn't go 40 minutes to Ashfork for the medicine. He sent a boy, and the boy was slow, and she... Her voice went, and she got it back. He never went to Helena, Mr. Pell. Where'd he sign it? Pell looked at her, and Clara watched a small, fast, ugly thing cross a lawyer's face, and she understood with a calm that surprised her that Mr. Pell did not know, that Mr. Pell had never asked, that Mr. Pell had been handed a clean folder in a clean office by a man who paid him well and had gotten on a horse. I'll inquire, Pell said. You do that. Mr. Whitmore. Pell closed the case. Mr. Holloway would like me to say that he holds no animus. He'd also like me to say that the territory is filing statehood papers, that federal survey follows statehood, and that when the surveyors come through this valley, they will ask one question and one question only, which is whose name is on the paper, not who fenced it, not who dug it, not who was good to it. He put his hat on. Sentiment isn't a title, sir. It never has been. He turned to go. He got 4 steps. Mr. Pell, Ethan said. Pell turned. Tell Richard the widow's name is Whitmore. Pell went absolutely still. I'm sorry. My wife, Ethan Whitmore said. Amos Whitmore's daughter, his heir. She's standing right there, and she's been Mrs. Whitmore for 6 days, and I imagine Richard's known that since Tuesday. But I'd like you to be the one to say it out loud in his office, Mr. Pell, because I'd like you to watch his face. He smiled without any humor at all. You're going to want to be standing near the door. Pell rode out. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Samuel very quietly, Sir, that was a mistake. I know. He didn't know. I know he didn't know. You just told Richard Holloway his statements got to beat a living air instead of a dead man's silence. I know Samuel. Then why? And Ethan Whitmore said, because she was standing right there, and I was not going to let one more man in this world talk over her head. Clara turned and looked at him, and Ethan looked back, and neither of them said a word, and Samuel put his hat on and walked away, because there are moments a foreman has the sense to leave. She went to work that afternoon. That was the thing nobody in that valley ever got over, and they told it for 40 years, that the new Mrs. Whitmore came down at noon on her second day, with her hair pinned up and her sleeves rolled, and she did not ask for a tour of the house, and she did not ask about the horses, and she walked into the office where the books were kept and said, "Where do you keep 1859? The bookkeeper was a man named Ives. "Ma'am, those are the ledgers." "I know what a ledger is." "There, ma'am, that's 30 years of—" "Then we'd best start," Clara said, and sat down. She read for 11 hours. She could sew a coat in 4. She could read a column of figures like a hymn, because she'd been keeping a household on nothing since she was 18, and there is no accountant on earth like a woman who has divided $1.60 ways. And what she found in those books took the top of her head off. Ives. "Ma'am, what's this?" She turned the book around. 1874. It says Bittner 40 acres nil. "That's a grant, ma'am." "A what?" "Old Mr. Whitmore give it him." Ives shifted. "Bittner come up from Texas with a wife and 4 children, and nothing, and he done a season here, and Mr. Josiah give him 40 acres off the south piece and the timber to build with. Nil means no charge." Clara turned the page. "Ives, there's 40 of these." "51, ma'am." 51. 51 families, Ives said. "That's counting the 2 that went bust, and 1 that got shot in Wyoming, which weren't our doing." He cleared his throat. "There's more of it than the book shows, ma'am, if you don't mind me saying. The book only shows land. There's the wages." "What about the wages?" Ives got a look on his face like a man about to jump. "Ma'am, do you know what a top hand gets in this territory? No. 30 a month and found. 25 most places. 18 if it's Holloway." He tapped the book. "We pay 40. Every man. 40 and found and a doctor. And if a man breaks his leg, he keeps drawing while it knits, which ain't done nowhere, ma'am. Not anywhere. Not once. I've wrote books for 4 outfits, and I never—" He stopped. "Mr. Ethan won't have it talked about." Clara sat back. "Why not?" "He says it ain't generous, it's arithmetic," Ives said. "He says a man who ain't scared works better. He's got a whole thing about it, ma'am. He'll say it if you get him going." "It isn't love, it's arithmetic." Clara put her hand over her mouth and sat in that little office and did not let a single sound out. "Ives," she said when she could, "why won't he have it talked about?" And Ives, who was 54 years old and had written books for 4 outfits, said, "Because folks'd like him for it, ma'am." At 11 o'clock that night, she found Samuel in the barn. "You knew my father." "I did." "You dug post holes with him in 61. 92 of them, Samuel said. "I counted. He didn't. That was the difference between us." Clara sat down on a bale because she'd learned that day that in that valley all the true conversations happened sitting on something you'd otherwise sleep on. "Samuel, I need you to tell me about Holloway." "Ma'am, I'd rather—" "He came at 6 this morning with 9 men, Clara said. "He's got a paper with my father's name on it and a lie in it, and Pell said statehood and survey, like a man laying down a card, and Ethan's not sleeping, and I've got 11 hours of ledgers in my head, and I still don't understand what's happening. So I'm asking you, not him. You." Samuel was quiet a long moment. "Richard Holloway ain't fighting for land," he said. "He's got 40,000 acres east of here." 60. "Then why?" "Because it ain't about land, ma'am, it never was." Samuel spat. "You want to know what this is, you got to go back to the war." "The war?" "Josiah Whitmore rode with an outfit in the war," Samuel said. "Volunteer horse, rough bunch. They didn't have a proper name, so they took one the way boys do, and the name they took—" He stopped. "Say it." "They called themselves the Hells Angels," Samuel said. Clara looked at him. "That's a blasphemy." "That's exactly what it was. That was the point of it, ma'am. They was 19 years old." He rubbed his face. 40 of 'em. They come out of it 13, and them 13 went every which way, after some to Texas, some to the mines. 2 went bad one's a judge in Denver this minute, but they held it. All these years. It ain't a club, ma'am, don't picture nothing with a sign on it. It's 13 men and their sons, and it's debts. A man says a name and a favor gets done in Sacramento and nobody ever writes it down. Clara's skin was crawling. And Holloway? Holloway's daddy rode with him. What? Rode with him and got put out, Samuel said. In 64. There's a thing happened and Josiah's the one that put him out, and I don't know the thing, and I never asked, and there's 4 men alive who know, and none of 'em'll say. Samuel, ma'am, listen to me. He leaned forward. Richard Holloway don't want the creek. Richard Holloway wants the day he can stand in this valley and know that Josiah Whitmore's boy went out of it broke. That's it. That's the whole account. He's been paying on it 30 years, and there ain't a figure on this earth that closes it. Clara sat there. Then why'd Marcus Hale sign? Because Marcus is owed money, and it's owed to the wrong men. And Victoria? Samuel looked at her sideways. Ma'am, can I be plain? Please. Miss Hale rode 400 miles to tell Mr. Ethan a thing she could have put in a letter. He got up. You figure out why, you'll know more'n I do. Clara went to find her husband. He was in the office where the box had been sitting with his back to the door, and she stood there a second before he knew she was in the room. Ethan. They're all gone to bed. I know. That's the part he'll never understand, Ethan said, not turning. Holloway. He thinks a valley's the ground. 91 men went to bed in it tonight, and every one of 'em's got a pair of boots that was bought with it, and he thinks the ground is the thing. Clara came and stood beside him. You knew about the Hells Angels. He didn't move. Samuel told you. I asked. That's not a thing to have in your head, Clara. It's in it now. Ethan let out a long breath. My father put Holloway's father out of that company in 1864, he said. And you're going to ask me why, and I'm going to tell you, and then you're going to understand why he's not going to stop. Tell me. Ethan Whitmore turned around. Because he took money, he said, to tell a man where 40 boys were sleeping, and 9 of them never got up. Clara's hand found the back of the chair. So it's not the creek, she said. It's not the creek. He's not trying to win this valley. No. He's trying to prove that your father's boy has a number, Clara said slowly, the same as everybody. Because if we're all for sale, if everybody's for sale, then his daddy wasn't a traitor. He was just early. Ethan Whitmore looked at his wife of 7 days for a long, long moment. Clara, he said quietly, you got there in one night. It took me 19 years. Then he's not going to stop when the court says no. No. He's going to keep coming until one of us takes $1. Yes? Then he's going to lose, Clara said. And Ethan said, why? And Clara Whitmore, standing in a house like a cathedral with her father's letters in a box upstairs, and her brother breathing easy 2 floors above her for the first time in 4 years, said, because Amos Whitmore wouldn't take 6,000 acres from a friend. Ethan didn't answer her for so long that Clara thought she'd said it wrong. Then he said, that's the thing I didn't say at the Ridge. What? You just said it. He was looking at her like a man watching a door open in a wall he'd painted himself. Clara, I stood up there with the whole speech in my mouth and I couldn't get it out, and it took you 11 hours in a ledger and 1 hour with Samuel, and you just said it. In one sentence. In my own kitchen. Say it anyway. Your father's the only argument I've got, Ethan said. That's it. That's the whole defense. There's no paper that beats Holloway's paper. There never will be. All I've got is a dead man who wouldn't take 6,000 acres, and a courtroom's got no use for that, and I've known it for 4 years, and it's why I did nothing. Clara sat down across from him. Then we don't go to a courtroom with it. There's nowhere else to go. There's Helena, Clara said. There's a receipt in Helena with my father's name on it, and Mr. Pell doesn't know where it was signed. Ethan, a lawyer, rode 4 hours to threaten you, and he could not tell me where my father signed. Because it doesn't matter. Clara, that's what I'm trying to make you understand. The paper doesn't have to be true. It has to be unbeaten. A dead man can't take the stand. No, Clara said. But his handwriting can. Ethan stopped. What? She was already up. She went out and up the stairs and came back with the box and set it on the desk between them and opened it, and she took out the top letter and turned it around and put her finger on the bottom line. Read it. Clara, read it out loud. Ethan read, Don't ask me again. A. Next one. He took it. And let the neighbors watch me do it. A. Next. Don't you dare tell my girl. A. He looked up. Clara. 31 letters, Clara said. I read every one of them on that floor last night, and I didn't know why my chest hurt, and now I do. Ethan, my father, never in his life wrote his own name. Not the whole of it. Not once. He signed A. Whitmore on a feed bill and A. on a letter to the only friend he had, and when he wrote me a note to say he'd gone to Ashfork, he signed it Pa. And that's the man. That is exactly the man. He didn't like the size of himself. Ethan's hands had gone still on the letter. And Pell's receipt, Clara said. Amos Whitmore. Amos Whitmore, she said. Full, round, pretty, like a man proud to be there. She leaned in. Where'd they get it, Ethan? You can't forge a name you've never seen. Somebody had to look at it first. So where in this world is my father's whole name in my father's own hand? Ethan Whitmore sat back very slowly. Oh God, he said. Say it. A marriage license. 1857, Clara said. Red hollow. My mother made him wear a collar and he complained about it for 20 years. There was a silence in that room with a shape to it. Clara, Ethan said, and his voice had changed entirely. If that book's been touched, then a man went into a county office and did something, Clara said, and a thing a man does can be found out because men are seen. That's the whole trouble with them. Ethan started to laugh. He put his hand over his eyes and laughed like it hurt. What? Nothing. What? I've had 4 lawyers on this for 6 months, Ethan Whitmore said. 4. 2 from Helena and 1 from Chicago. And a seamstress from Red Hollow found the seam in 1 night. That's what a seamstress does, Clara said. You want to know where a thing was made, you don't look at the front. Anybody can make the front look right. You turn it inside out and you look at the stitching, because a man will spend $100 on the outside of a coat and never once think about the inside, and the inside is where he tells the truth. Ethan looked at her. Say that again in front of Richard Holloway, he said, and I'll die happy. They went to Ashfork on Friday. Clara wanted to leave Toby, and Toby had opinions about that delivered at breakfast with Mrs. Fay, standing behind him, nodding along like a hired second. I'm coming. You're not. I'm better. You're better because you've slept 4 nights in a bed. I'm better because I'm here, Toby said. And you're going to a town to find out about our father, and I'm his too. Clara, I'm his the same as you are, and everybody in this house treats me like a cake somebody's carrying. Mrs. Fay said, he ate 2 eggs. Mrs. Fay, 2 eggs and a rasher, ma'am, and he was after a 3rd. That's not, ma'am, Mrs. Fay said. I don't say a word about your business. I'll say 1. That boy's been dying so long he's forgot how to do anything else. Somebody's got to let him try something and find out he don't drop dead of it. Clara stood there with her mouth open. Fine, she said. Fine, but you ride in the wagon. Yes. And if you cough once, I'll cough on purpose to see what you do, Toby said, and went back to his plate, and Clara heard Ethan make a noise behind her that he tried very hard to turn into a cough of his own. Victoria Hale was in the hotel dining room in Ashfork at 11 o'clock in the morning with a cup of coffee in front of her that she hadn't touched. She'd been there since 8. Clara found that out later, and it stayed with her. Sit, Victoria said. No, Ethan said. Ethan, for the love of God, I'm not asking you to court me. I'm asking you to sit so the whole room stops looking. She glanced up. Mrs. Whitmore, you'll sit, won't you? You've got sense. Clara sat. Ethan, after a second, sat. Marcus signed on the 14th of April, Victoria said without any preamble at all. In Richard's office in Helena at 4 in the afternoon, and I know the hour because he came home at 6 and drank a bottle and a half and told me a lie about a horse. She turned the cup a quarter turn. He swore he was present in 1859. He swore he watched Amos Whitmore take $1,100 in gold and sign a quitclaim. He swore he was there. He was 9, Clara said. He was 9 years old and he was in Boston, Victoria said, at our aunt's for 2 years because our mother was ill and there is a school with a book with his name in it, and Richard doesn't know that because Marcus was too ashamed to tell him. He spent his whole life pretending he grew up out here. Her mouth twisted. That's my brother. That's the whole man. He'd rather perjure himself than admit he had a governess. Ethan said, Why are you telling me this? Because I want something. There it is. Yes, Ethan, there it is, Victoria said, and something snapped in her voice for the first time. There's the price. You've been waiting 4 years to hear a woman say a price, so here it is, take it out and look at it. I want my brother to live. The room noise went on around them, and none of it came in. Richard's got paper on Marcus, Victoria said. $11,000, and it isn't Richard's money. It's Denver money, and the men behind it don't send lawyers. Marcus signs the paper, goes away. Marcus doesn't sign, and one morning my brother's horse comes home. She looked up. So he signed. And now the only way this stops is if Richard's case dies so completely that nobody ever calls Marcus to say it out loud in front of a judge, because the moment he says it in a courtroom, he's a felon. And the moment he's a felon, he's no use to Richard. And the moment he's no use to Richard, he's a loose end, Clara said. Yes. So you don't want the statement beaten, Clara said slowly. You want it buried. You want Holloway to drop it and never file it. Victoria Hale looked at Clara with something that was nearly respect. Yes. That's not how it works, Ethan said. If I've got proof his witness is a liar, I use it. That's the whole, and Marcus hangs. Marcus signed it. Marcus is a coward, Victoria said. That's not a hanging offense, or there'd be no one left in Montana. Victoria. He's all I have, she said. And it came out flat and small and absolutely bare, and Clara watched Ethan Whitmore hear it and watched him not know what to do with it. You had me, Ethan said. The words went out of him before he could stop them. Clara felt her own face heat. She wanted to be somewhere else, anywhere else, and neither of them looked at her, and she understood she was sitting in the middle of something 11 years old. Victoria set the cup down. No, she said. I didn't. You left. I left. 11 months, Ethan said, and his voice was climbing, and he was trying to hold it and failing in front of a room. 11 months Victoria and you put your hand on my chest and said you could learn to love the place if I made it easier, and I said, love me first, and you said that's the same thing. And then you were gone in 9 days. 9 days. You had it packed. Yes. You had it packed, Victoria. Yes, Ethan, I had it packed. Why? And Victoria Hale said, because Richard came to me in March. Everything stopped. Clara heard a fork on a plate 2 tables over. She heard a wagon in the street. She did not hear Ethan breathing at all. What? March of 72, Victoria said. Marcus was already in it by then. I didn't know how deep I knew he was frightened. Richard came to the house. He was very pleasant. He always is. That's the thing people never believe about him. And he sat in my mother's parlor, and he explained to me in the kindest voice you ever heard that Marcus's debt could be adjusted. Her hands were perfectly still on the table, and Clara, who read hands the way other people read faces, saw exactly what that cost. Adjusted downward, in exchange for very little. He didn't want me to steal anything. He didn't want me to hurt you. He just wanted me to stay. Ethan said no. He wanted me at that ranch, in that house, for a year, 2 years, however long, married if it came to it, and every so often, not often, he'd have a question. Where's the water rights kept? What's Josiah's boy afraid of? Who does he trust? Does he ever say a name? Victoria's chin came up. That's all. That was the whole of it. Stay where you already are and answer a question twice a year and your brother lives. No. And Ethan, she said. I said yes. Clara heard Ethan's chair leg scrape. I said yes, Victoria said. In my mother's parlor in March, and I went back out to that valley, and I lived in your house for 2 months, and I answered nothing because every time he asked, I found I couldn't get the words out. And then one night in May, you said something at supper about your father's letters and where you kept them, and I looked at Samuel putting the plate down, and I thought, her voice finally went, I thought I know where the letters are. Nobody moved, and I understood that I was going to do it, Victoria Hale said. Not that day, not that year. But someday when Marcus was in it again, because Marcus is always in it again, I was going to do it. That's the thing you can't understand about me, and I've never blamed you for it. I'm not strong. I'm not your seamstress here, and I never was. I looked at myself in May of 1872, and I saw a woman who was going to sell you eventually on a Tuesday for a brother who'd only lose it at cards. So I made you hate me, she said, and I did it well because I'm good at that, and it was the one and only decent act of my entire life, and I have never been able to tell a living soul about it, and it has rotted me. Ethan Whitmore was standing. Clara didn't remember him standing. You said you could love the place if I made it easier, he said hoarsely. I know. You knew that would... I picked it on purpose, Victoria said. I sat up half the night picking it. I wanted a thing you'd never forgive, because if you'd forgiven me, I'd have stayed. And if I'd stayed, I'd have taken the letters in 1874, and Ethan, you'd have lost the valley, and you'd never have known it was me until you did. You could have told me. And what would you have done? I'd have paid it, Ethan roared, and the whole dining room turned. $11,000, Victoria. I had it in the house. I'd have paid it in an afternoon and never missed it. I know, Victoria Hale said. Then why? Because then I'd have been a woman you bought, she said, and the room was very, very quiet. That's all, she said. That's the whole of it. You'd have paid, and it would have been generous, and it would have been kind, and every day for 40 years I'd have sat at your table and known what I cost. And you'd have known too, Ethan. You'd have looked at me across the eggs and done the sum. You can't help it. Your father couldn't help it either. Ethan sat down like his strings were cut. 4 years, he said. Yes. I've spent 4 years, Victoria. I've spent 4 years sick. I looked at Samuel and thought, what's his number? I looked at Mrs. Fay putting down a plate. I know. You did that to me. Yes, Victoria said. To keep you. That's the joke, isn't it? That's the whole joke, and I've been laughing at it alone since 1872. And Clara Whitmore, who had said nothing for 10 minutes, said no, that's not the joke. They both looked at her. The joke, Clara said, is that he built his whole life around one idea, which is that everybody's for sale. And the one person he built it on is the only person in this story who wasn't. Victoria's face came apart. Just for a second. She got it back. Clara had to hand it to her. She got it back inside of 2 breaths and put the coffee cup down and folded her hands. But Clara had seen it, and Victoria knew she'd seen it. And something passed between the 2 women across that table that neither of them ever named. Well, Victoria said, that's an expensive sentence. Miss Hale. Mrs. Whitmore. Where'd Marcus sign? Victoria blinked. I told you. Richard's office. No, the 1859 receipt. The one my father supposedly put his name on. Clara leaned forward. Marcus swore he watched it. So Marcus had to say where. What did he say? Victoria frowned. Helena, the Territorial House. Which is a hotel. Which is a hotel. On what date? I don't... Victoria stopped. The 11th of October. Clara sat back. And Ethan, watching her face, said, Clara, what? My mother and father were married on the 11th of October, Clara said. 1857. My father never in his whole life missed it, not once. He'd come home from anywhere. He came home from a cattle drive in 71 2 days early and lost the wage for it, and she was too sick to know he'd done it, and he sat there anyway. Her voice had gone strange and flat. He didn't go to Helena on the 11th of October, Miss Hale. He didn't go anywhere on the 11th of October. Somebody picked that date off a piece of paper because it was the only piece of paper they had with his whole name on it, and they were so careless they used the date on it too. Nobody said anything. "The marriage license," Ethan said. "The marriage license. They traced it." "They traced it," Clara said. "And then they got clever and put the date on the receipt, because a forger's a man who's frightened, and a frightened man copies everything he sees." Victoria Hale said very quietly, "Where's the book?" "Red Hollow," Clara said. "County clerk's office, which is a room behind the post office with a stove in it, and the clerk's been dead 11 years. Then who keeps it?" And Clara Whitmore said, "His widow." They were in Red Hollow by 4 o'clock the next afternoon. Clara had not thought about what it would be to ride back in. She'd been so full of the work, the book, the name, the date, that she hadn't once thought about the street, and then they came down the street and she found out. It was the silence. Nobody yelled. Nobody pointed. The town of Red Hollow, Montana simply stopped what it was doing and watched Clara Whitmore ride back in 11 days after she'd ridden out with a stranger, and it watched her the way it had watched her for 9 years, and Clara understood in about 4 seconds that not one single thing had changed, and it never would. Then a man came out of Hobson's store with an apron on. Cal Hobson stood on his own step and looked at her. "Clara." "Mr. Hobson." He looked at the horse. He looked at the coat. He looked at Toby sitting up in that wagon with color in his face for the first time in 4 years, and Clara watched Cal Hobson do a sum in his head, and watched the answer come out, and watched him decide what to do about it. "You look well," he said. "I am." "That's—" He stopped. "That's fine. That's real fine, Clara." "Mr. Hobson," Clara said. "Where's Martha Pritchard living now?" And Cal Hobson's face closed like a hand. "You don't want to go up there." "Why not?" "She's not right, since the winter." He was wiping his hands on the apron over and over. "She don't come down. She don't take company. Doc's been twice and she wouldn't open the door." "Where?" "Clara." "Where Cal?" "Same place," Hobson said. "Behind the post office. She never left it." He looked at his hands. "Clara, listen. There was a man." Everything in Clara went cold and quiet. "What man?" "Last spring, April, May. Come in on the stage." Hobson wouldn't look up. "Nice fella. Bought a hat off me. Said he was in county records, said he was doing the survey work ahead of statehood, said he had to see the old books." He swallowed. "And I said, well, that'd be Martha, and I walked him up there myself, Clara. I walked him up there and knocked on the door for him and told her he was all right." Clara sat on that horse in the middle of the street. "You walked him up?" "I didn't know." "You walked him up. He had papers, Clara. He had a letter with a seal on it. What was I supposed—" "You've known Martha Pritchard 50 years, Clara said. "You've known me since I was born. You watched me sew for 11 cents an hour, and you knew where the money came from, and you never said one word, and then a stranger came in with a seal and you walked him up the hill." Cal Hobson stood on his step with his apron in his hands. "Yes," he said, and it took the fight right out of her because there was nothing to push against. He wasn't going to defend himself. That was the thing about Red Hollow that she'd never let herself look at straight. It wasn't a town full of villains. It was a town full of men who'd say yes, they did it, and go on standing there. "What was his name?" Clara said. "Said it was Pell." Ethan Whitmore said, "Well, hell." Martha Pritchard wouldn't open the door. Clara knocked for 2 minutes, and then said through the wood, "Mrs. Pritchard, it's Clara Whitmore," and heard nothing at all, and knocked again, and heard a chair move. "Go away." "Mrs. Pritchard." "I know who you are." The voice was old and dry and absolutely awake, and Clara thought she's not gone at all, they just want her to be. "Amos's girl. Married a rich man and come back with a wagon. Everybody's been at me for 11 days about it. Mrs. Pritchard, I need to see the marriage book. Silence. Then, there ain't one. Clara closed her eyes. Mrs. Pritchard, there ain't a book. Go home. There's a book, Clara said. My mother and father are in it. October 11th, 1857. And my mother made him wear a collar, and he complained about it every year of his life, and I want to see it, and I'm going to stand on this step until I do. Then you'll stand. Ethan touched Clara's arm. She shook him off. Mrs. Pritchard, a man came here last spring. Nothing. A man named Pell came here with a seal on a letter, and Cal Hobson walked him up your steps, Clara said. And I think he saw that book, and I think when he left, there was a page gone out of it. The silence on the other side of that door changed. Clara heard it change. She'd spent 9 years listening to people through doors. That's what a seamstress does. She stands in the hall while they argue about whether they can afford the hem, and she knew the exact sound of a person who has just been told a thing they already knew. Mrs. Pritchard, Clara said. Did you take his money? Nothing. Martha, Clara said. And the old woman on the other side of the door said, $20. Ethan started to say something. Clara put her hand up and he stopped. He said it was a fee, Martha Pritchard said. For my trouble. Everybody pays a fee for records, he said, that's the law. And I said I never heard of such a thing. And he laughed and said, ma'am, out here nobody's heard of anything. And he was nice. He was so nice. And I hadn't had $20 in one piece since Hollis died, and it was February, and I was... She stopped. I was burning the furniture. Clara's throat closed. He sat at my table 2 hours, Martha said. I made him coffee. I made him coffee, girl. And when he was gone, I went to put the book back, and I opened it, and the page was cut out, and the cut was so clean I couldn't tell where. He had a razor in his sleeve, and he sat at my table, and I brought him a cup. Martha. So don't you come up here, the old woman said, and her voice was breaking now. Don't you come up here with your rich man and your wagon and ask me about the book because I took the $20, Clara. That's what I am. Hollis kept them books 41 years and never took a nickel, and I sold your mother's page for $20, and I'd do it again in February. That's what I am. Now go home. Clara stood on that step for a long moment. Then she said, I took a coin. Nothing. 11 days ago, Clara said. In Hobson's store. A man I'd never seen put a gold coin on the counter and asked me to marry him, and I knocked it on the floor, and everybody in this town's going to tell that story for 40 years, like it's about how proud I am. Her voice was shaking. It isn't. Martha, I knocked it on the floor, and then I stood in a livery at 6 in the morning, and I said yes. Because Toby couldn't breathe, that's all. That's the whole reason. I sold my name to a stranger for a doctor's bill, and I'd do it again this afternoon and twice tomorrow. The door didn't open. So don't tell me what you are, Clara said. I know what you are. You're a woman who was cold in February. I'm a woman whose brother was blue in the lips. And there's a man in Helena who found the both of us and figured out the price and paid it, and Martha, he was right. He was right about you, and he was right about me. We're for sale. That's true. That's just true. Silence. But he thinks that's the end of the sentence, Clara said. And it isn't. Because I'm standing on your step, and you're on the other side of that door, crying about a cup of coffee you gave a man a year ago. And Martha, a woman who's for sale, doesn't do that. She spends the $20 and forgets. It's the ones who can't be bought clean who lie awake. That's how you know. The chair moved. Martha, Clara said, open the door. Let's be two women who took the money and can't sleep, and let's go be a nuisance about it. The door opened. Martha Pritchard was 81 years old and about 90 pounds, and she had been crying for some time. He cut it with a razor, she said. I know. 41 years my Hollis kept them books. I know. There's a stub, Martha Pritchard said. Clara stopped breathing. What? There's a stub, the old woman said, and she was almost angry about it, wiping her face with the heel of her hand. Girl, do you know how a book's made? It's sewed. It's folded and sewed, and you cut a leaf out of a sewed book, you don't get the leaf. You get half the leaf because the other half's on the far side of the thread holding the whole thing in. You cut one page, you gotta cut two, and if you only cut one, the one you left flaps loose like a tongue for the rest of its life. He took the front. He didn't know about the back. Clara put her hand on the doorframe. "What's on the back?" she said. Martha Pritchard turned around and walked into that room, and she moved a stove lid, and she took out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth because she had put it in a cold stove 11 months ago and had been sleeping in her coat ever since. "Witnesses," she said. She opened it on the table. It was a stub of paper about an inch wide, ragged where the razor had gone through, and there was a line of writing across it that had been on the back of the page. A man had cut out with a razor in a warm kitchen with a cup of coffee at his elbow. Clara read it. She read it twice. "Ethan?" she said, and her voice came out wrong. "Ethan?" He came in. "Read it." Ethan Whitmore looked down at a strip of paper in a widow's kitchen in Red Hollow, Montana, and read in a county clerk's careful hand, "Witness for the groom, J. Whitmore." Nobody spoke. "My father," Ethan said. "Your father stood up for my father at his wedding," Clara said in October of 1857. Clara. "They weren't business," she said, and it broke out of her all at once, 9 years of it. "Ethan, they weren't. I thought I've been thinking for 4 days that my father did a favor for a rich man, that he put his name on a paper for an acquaintance, and he stood up at his wedding. He held his hat. He was Ethan. That's not a handshake with a friend. That's the only friend he had." And Clara Whitmore sat down in Martha Pritchard's chair and put her face in her hands and cried for the first time since she was 18 years old. Ethan Whitmore didn't touch her. He'd have given his arm to. Clara knew it felt him standing there 4 feet away with his hands open and useless, and he didn't, because in a livery on a hay bale, a woman had said, "Not until I say," and he had said agreed without thinking about it, and he was not going to spend that on a moment when she was weak. It was Martha Pritchard, 81, who sat down and put her hand on Clara's back. "There now," she said. "I'm sorry." "Don't you dare," Martha said. "You cry in my kitchen. I've had nothing to do in here for 11 months but be ashamed. This is better." And then over Clara's head, Martha Pritchard looked at Ethan Whitmore and said, "There's the other thing." Ethan said, "What other thing?" The old woman got up and went back to the stove and took out a second bundle. "Amos give me this in 1859, she said. "Come down here on a Thursday, wouldn't sit, wouldn't take coffee." Handed it to Hollis and said, "Put it in the book," and Hollis said, "Amos, this ain't a county matter," and Amos said. She stopped, and something moved across that old face. Amos said, "It will be someday, and I won't be here for it." Clara raised her head. "What is it?" Ethan said. Martha Pritchard put it on the table. It was 1 page. It was dated the 4th of June, 1859. It was in a lawyer's hand, and it was signed at the bottom in a small cramped script. Clara would have known in the dark, and it said in the language of the time that Amos Whitmore of Red Hollow acknowledged that he held the 6,040 acres described therein, not for himself nor for his heirs, but in trust for Josiah Whitmore and his heirs forever, and that he claimed no interest in the same and never had. Clara read it 4 times. The room got very quiet, and Ethan Whitmore said, "Clara." She didn't answer. "Clara, do you understand what that is?" "Yes," she said. "It kills Holloway. Clara, it kills him. It's dated 11 weeks before his forged receipt, and it's in the county's hands the whole time, and it says the land was never Amos's to sell, which means his quitclaim's a quitclaim of nothing, which means the whole thing's—" He stopped, because he'd gotten there. Clara watched him get there. She watched his face do it, and she thought, "He's fast, he was always fast. That's what's wrong with him." "Say the rest," she said. "No." "Say it." "Clara." "It means I own nothing," Clara Whitmore said. The words sat in Martha Pritchard's kitchen like a fifth person. "It means my father never owned an acre," she said. It means there's no heir. It means the thing you married me for doesn't exist, and it hasn't since June of 1859, and it means—" Her voice was very steady, which frightened her. "It means the knife you put in my hand was never a knife. I've got no hold on you at all. I never did." Ethan didn't say anything. "And that paper's the only copy," Clara said, "and it's been in a stove for 11 months, and Martha Pritchard's 81, and if I put it in that fire right now, there is not one soul on God's earth who'd ever know it existed. And Holloway's receipt still dies on the marriage stub. You'd still win. You'd win, and I'd still be the heir, and I'd have the water, and I'd have you by the throat for the rest of your life." Ethan Whitmore said quietly, "Yes." Clara picked up the paper. The stove was right there. It was 4 feet away, and it was lit because Martha had lit it when they came in out of company manners for the first time in a month. Nobody moved, and Clara stood there with her father's promise in her hand, and understood finally and completely what her father had done in 1874 when he wrote, "I'd rather be poor honest than rich by a trick," and what it had cost him, and that the cost was the entire point, because a thing that costs you nothing isn't worth anything to anybody. She walked over to Ethan. She held it out. "Take it," she said. "Clara, take it." He didn't move. "Ethan Whitmore," Clara said, "I am handing you the deed to your own life, and I am doing it in a kitchen with 2 witnesses, and you are going to take it, and then you are going to know something for the rest of your days that nobody else on this earth is ever going to be able to tell you." His hand came up. It was shaking. "You'll have nothing," he said. "I'll have my father," Clara said. "That's more than I had 11 days ago. Clara, if you give me that paper, you've got no reason. You can't ever be sure I won't." "I know." "You'd be trusting me." "Yes." "With everything." "Yes," Clara said. "That's what it is. That's the whole thing you've been trying to buy for 4 years, and it's got no price on it, Ethan. That's why you couldn't find it. You have to be handed it, by somebody who could have burned it." And Ethan Whitmore took the paper out of his wife's hand, and stood there, and looked at it, and then he did a thing that Martha Pritchard talked about until the day she died. He sat down on the floor, just went down with his back against that widow's wall with 14,000 acres in his fist, and put his head back and made a sound like a man who's been holding his breath since 1872. "Ethan, give me a minute." "Ethan, Clara, give me a minute," he said, "because I've been sick for 4 years, and I think it just broke, and I don't know what I am underneath it." Clara knelt down. She was close enough to touch him. She had been close enough to touch him for 11 days, and had not once, and neither had he, and there was a rule about it that they had both been keeping the way you keep a fence you built yourself. "Ethan," Clara Whitmore said, "look at me." He looked at her. "I say," she said, and she took his face in both her hands. Martha Pritchard said, "Well," and got up and went and stood in the other room, which was the kindest thing anybody had done in that house in 11 months. It didn't last long. It couldn't. Ethan Whitmore's hands came up and closed over Clara's wrists, not to move them, just to hold on to something. And he said her name once against her mouth, like a man who'd finally gotten to say it. And then he pulled back an inch and said hoarse, "Clara, I have to tell you what I'm going to do with that paper, and you're not going to like it." "Ethan." "No, now. Right now. Before I've got a minute of this in me, because if I get an hour of it, I'll never say it." She sat back on her heels. "Say it." "I'm not going to use it." Clara stared at him. "What? Not the way you think." He held up the trust page. "Clara, this wins. It wins so hard Holloway's case doesn't just lose, it turns into fraud. And the minute a judge says fraud, there's got to be a forger and a witness, and the witness is Marcus Hale. And Marcus Hale is a coward with $11,000 of Denver money on his neck." He looked at her. "The day I file this, that boy's dead." "That's not your—" "It's exactly my doing," Ethan said. "That's what I've been sick with for 4 years. Clara, that everything I touch turns into a figure. If I file this, I win the valley, and it costs a man's life, and I get to say it wasn't me, It was the court. No. Not with your father's name on the paper. Not that way. Clara sat there on a widow's kitchen floor with her heart going. Then what? Then we make him drop it. He won't. He might, Ethan said, if the only thing left to win is the thing he actually wants. And Clara, who had gotten there once already in one night, got there again. Oh, she said, you're going to give him the sum. I'm going to give him the sum. Ethan, if you're wrong, then I lose 14,000 acres, Ethan Whitmore said, and I'll still have gotten more out of this week than I got out of the last 4 years. Richard Holloway came to the valley on a Tuesday. He came alone. That was the first thing that put the whole yard on edge. No lawyer, no 9 men, nothing but a good horse and a good coat and a small, pleasant, gray-haired man who took his hat off at the gate without being asked. Mr. Whitmore? Mr. Holloway. You said come alone. I came alone. I'd like it noted. It's noted. Is that her? Holloway looked at Clara with real, uncomplicated interest, the way a man looks at a horse he's heard about. Mrs. Whitmore, I've read about you. Pell's report is very entertaining. He says you asked him what a quitclaim was, and then took his legs off with it. He didn't know where my father signed. No, Holloway agreed. He didn't. That was careless, and I've dealt with it. He turned back to Ethan. You've got something. You wouldn't have asked me here. I've got something. Then let's do it inside, in the interest of— No, Ethan said. Here. Holloway's eyebrows went up a hair. 91 men were standing in that yard, and none of them had been told to be there. He said. Theater. No, sir, Ethan said. Witnesses. He held out the page. Holloway read it. Clara watched him do it. She'd expected she didn't know what. Rage. A hand going somewhere. Instead, Richard Holloway read a piece of paper that ended 30 years of his life, and his face did nothing at all. And then he handed it back and said, That's genuine. It is. Where? A stove in Red Hollow. Holloway laughed. It was a real laugh, short and pleased, and it was the most frightening sound Clara had ever heard from a human being. A stove. 11 months in a stove while I paid 4 men $800. He shook his head. Well, that's the business, isn't it? Fine. You've beaten me, and I'll tell you what happens now because I imagine you've worked it out, and I'd like to see whether you've got the stomach to say it out loud. You go, Ethan said. You're the one enjoying yourself. I file anyway, Holloway said pleasantly. That's what happens. I file, you produce, that I lose, and then a judge asks how a dead man came to sign a receipt in a hotel he never entered on his own wedding anniversary, and the answer is Marcus Hale, and Marcus Hale goes to prison, or he goes to a shallow place outside Denver, and either way, he spread his hands. That's a man. On your paper, because you filed. Yes, Ethan said, and you don't want him. No, because you're Josiah's boy, Holloway said, and for the first time, something came into his voice that wasn't pleasant at all. Because you're exactly Josiah's boy. That's the whole trouble with your family. You'd rather carry a thing than set it down on somebody. Mr. Holloway, so here's my price, Holloway said, and I want your wife to hear it because she's the only one here who's been poor, and she'll understand what I'm about to do. I'll withdraw. Marcus never gets called. The statement burns, and Pell forgets the road. And in exchange, he looked at Ethan almost gently. You pay me $1. Nobody moved. $1, Holloway said, out of your pocket, in front of your men, and you say Mr. Holloway here is your money. The yard was silent. Clara felt it go through her like cold water. The elegance of it, the cruelty of it, and she understood that this man had been building this sentence for 30 years and had ridden 400 miles alone to say it. That's it, Ethan said. That's it. $1, and they all watch you do it, Richard Holloway said. 91 men, and every one of them goes home tonight and lies in a bunk and thinks he paid. And they'll never say it out loud. They love you too much, but they'll think it, and in 10 years they'll tell it in a bar in Ashfork, And in 40 years, it'll be the only thing anybody remembers about Josiah Whitmore's boy. He smiled. That he had a number. That's all I've ever wanted, son. I don't want your creek. I've got water. I want the sentence. Ethan Whitmore stood there, and Clara watched her husband, the man who had built 4 years and a marriage and a whole architecture of lies around the single unbearable idea that everybody on earth is for sale. Watched him look at $1's worth of daylight and understand that this was the exact shape of the thing he'd been afraid of since 1872, and that it had ridden into his yard and taken its hat off and asked politely. "Sir," Samuel said. "Don't." Samuel. "Don't. We'll fight it. 91 men, sir, will." Samuel. Ethan said. "Shut up. Please, I love you." He reached into his pocket. Clara heard the whole yard breathe in, and Ethan Whitmore took out a silver dollar and held it up so that every man in that valley could see it, and he said, "Mr. Holloway, here is your money." And he put it in Richard Holloway's hand. Nobody said a word. Holloway closed his fist around it. He looked at that fist for a long moment, and Clara, who had spent 9 years reading what a face does when it finally gets the thing it wanted, watched Richard Holloway find out. "There," Ethan said quietly. "You've got it. 30 years. There it is." Holloway didn't answer. "Now you're going to want to ride," Ethan said, "because in about 10 minutes you're going to notice a thing and you'd rather not notice it here." "Don't. You paid $800 to 4 men and $11,000 to a card player and 30 years of your one life," Ethan Whitmore said. "And I paid $1. And Richard, I've got it in my pocket every day. I've got 100 of them. It's $1. His voice never rose. "You wanted me to have a number. I've got one. It's the smallest number there is. And I'm going to go in that house and eat supper with my wife, and you're going to ride 400 miles with a coin in your hand, and you tell me which one of us just got bought." Holloway stood absolutely still. "That's not," he said and stopped. "Say it. That's not what it means." "It's what it means now," Ethan said. "You said the price. I paid it. It's yours. You don't get to also have it hurt." And Richard Holloway, 61 years old, opened his hand and looked at a silver dollar. And Clara saw the exact instant a man's whole life came apart in his palm. Not with a shout, not with a gun, but with the quiet, obliterating discovery that he'd spent 30 years building a door, and there was nothing behind it. "Your father," Holloway said thickly. "Put my father out." "I know what my father did." 9 boys. "I know, sir," Ethan said. "I know all of it. And I'm sorry. Not for him. For you. Because you were, 6, 7, and you didn't do anything, and you've been paying for it since, and there's nobody left to take it out on, but me and I won't hold still for it." He stepped back. "Go home, Mr. Holloway. Keep the dollar. It's the only thing you've ever gotten off this family, and it was free." Richard Holloway rode out of that valley without another word. He put the dollar in his vest pocket. Samuel saw him do it, and Samuel swore for the rest of his life that 4 miles out on the ridge, the man stopped and sat his horse for a long time with his hand over that pocket, like something in his chest hurt. He never came back. He never filed. Marcus Hale was never called. 11 months later, Richard Holloway died in Helena, of a thing that killed him fast, and the man who laid him out found a silver dollar in his vest that had been rubbed smooth on one side from 30,000 touchings, and nobody in that room knew what it meant, and nobody ever did. Victoria Hale came in October. She stood in the yard and wouldn't come up the steps, and Clara went down to her because it seemed to her that somebody in this story ought to walk toward somebody once. "He's alive," Victoria said. "Marcus, he's in Oregon. He's cutting timber. Mrs. Whitmore, my brother's cutting timber, and he wrote me a letter with 3 words spelled wrong, and I've read it 40 times. I'm glad. I came to say a thing and then I'll go." Victoria's jaw was tight. "I've spent 4 years believing I was the only person on earth who knew what he was worth and gave him up anyway. And I want you to know that I hated you on that porch, in the gray dress. I looked at your sleeve with the blood on it, and I hated you because I'd spent 11 years being clever, and you'd been married 6 days, and you'd already done the thing I couldn't do. Miss Hale. You told him the truth, Victoria said. That's all it ever was. That's the whole trick, and I never once thought of it. Clara stood there in the yard. He asked me if any of it was true, she said. That day, on the steps. I remember. You said all of it, and that's why you left. Yes? Miss Hale? Clara took a breath. Come in and eat. Mrs. Fay's got a thing about people who ride 400 miles and don't eat. Victoria Hale looked at her for a long moment, and Clara watched a woman decide whether she could stand to be forgiven. No, she said. Not this year. Then next year. Maybe next year. She came the year after, and the year after that. And in 1881 she stood up in that yard as godmother to a girl named Bess Whitmore, and cried so hard Mrs. Fay had to take her inside, and neither Clara nor Ethan ever once said a word about it in her hearing, which was the only gift left to give her. The trust page went to Helena in the spring. Ethan filed it plain, no lawsuit, no fight, nothing to beat just a man walking into a land office with a piece of paper from 1859 and putting the record straight 30 years late. It made the valley his clean, finally in his own name, the way his father had wanted and hadn't lived to see. Clara stood in that office and watched him do it, and owned at the end of it exactly nothing. They rode home, and she didn't say a word for 11 miles. Clara, I'm all right. You're not? I'm all right, she said, and then 3 miles later, I don't have anything to hold over you. No. I don't like it. I know. I'm not Ethan. I'm not built for it. I've never in my life not had a wall at my back. Even when I had nothing, and nothing's yours, nobody can take it. Clara. What? Marry me, Ethan Whitmore said. She pulled the horse up. What? Marry me! He was looking straight ahead at the road, and his ears had gone red, and he was 28 years old and worth a fortune, and he could not look at her. Properly. Reverend Toll can come out. There'd be people, 91 of them, and Martha and Toby'd stand up and you'd wear something you made. Ethan, we are married. You married a broke cowboy for a doctor's bill, he said. That's a thing that happened to you. I've been living on it for a year like a thief. Now he did look at her. I want you to marry me on purpose, in front of everybody, knowing every single thing. And Clara, if you say no, nothing changes. The house is yours. The doctor's paid Toby's got a room till he's 90, and I'll say it once and never again. That's not a hook. Clara sat on that horse in the road. That's the same speech, she said. That's the same speech you gave me outside a church in the dark. It's the only one I've got. It isn't love, it's arithmetic. No, Ethan Whitmore said. That's the difference. It's love. And I've got no arithmetic left. Clara, I've got nothing to trade and nothing to hold and nothing to offer that you can't already take, and I'm asking anyway like a fool in a road. And Clara Whitmore started to laugh, and then she couldn't, and she got down off that horse and walked over and put her forehead against his knee and stood there in the dirt for a while. Yes, she said. You idiot, yes. They were married the second time on the 11th of October. She picked it. She didn't explain it, and Ethan didn't ask, and Martha Pritchard, 82, and in a new dress, understood the instant she heard the date, and had to go stand behind the barn for a minute. Toby Whitmore stood up for his sister. He was 12, and he'd grown 4 inches in a year, and he had color in his face, and he made it through the whole thing without one cough. And when Reverend Toll asked who gave this woman, the boy said, Nobody. She came on her own, which he had not been told to say, and which Clara had not expected, and which took her out at the knees in front of 140 people. Cal Hobson came. Nobody invited him. He rode 2 days and stood at the back with his hat in his hands, and when it was done he came up to Clara and said, I'd like to say a thing, and I ain't got the right to. Then don't say it. All right, Hobson said. And that was the whole of it, and Clara thought about it for 30 years, and never once decided whether she'd been cruel. Toby Whitmore lived. That's the part people always want and almost never get. His lungs never came right. He coughed in the cold his whole life. And there were winters, and there was one bad February in '84 that took 10 years off his sister. But he lived. He read law in Helena and hated it, and came home and ran the books. After Ives died, and he was 51 years old and had 4 children and a bad temper about hay prices when he stood up at his sister's funeral in 1919 and told the story about the coin. He told it every year until he died. He told it wrong on purpose, everybody knew, because he liked the sound of the room when he got to the part where she knocked it on the floor. Ives died first. Then Mrs. Fay, in her own bed at 90, with Clara holding her hand and calling her by her Christian name for the first time in 28 years, which Mrs. Fay found so mortifying she said ma'am, and died. Samuel went last of the old ones. He was 94. Clara was 71, and she went out to the bunkhouse and sat with him, and near the end he got confused and thought she was somebody else, and he said, "Amos, Amos, you stubborn son of a bitch, take the land." And Clara Whitmore held that old man's hand and said, "No." And Samuel laughed and said, "Damn you," and went to sleep. The valley outlasted all of them. By 1900, the Whitmore place ran to 19,000 acres, and everybody in Montana knew the name, and not one person in the state could have told you the size of it, because that was never what got told. What got told was the wages. $40 when the territory paid $25 and $100 when it paid $60, and a doctor on the payroll from 1873 to the day Clara died and after. What got told was the 51 families, and then the 90, and then the 130, a bad year on the South Peace, and a Bittner boy with nothing and 40 acres, and the timber to build with and nil in the book because there was no charge. There was never a charge. What got told was that a man came to the Whitmore place in 1897 with a folder and an offer, and Ethan Whitmore, 52 years old and gray, heard him out for 2 hours and was perfectly courteous, and at the end of it, reached in his pocket and put a silver dollar on the table and said, "That's my price, and it's already been paid," and walked out, and nobody in that room ever understood it, and Clara laughed until she cried. And what got told for 100 years in that valley by people whose great-grandparents dug the post holes was the day the seamstress from Red Hollow handed her husband a piece of paper worth 14,000 acres in a widow's kitchen and kept nothing back. Clara Whitmore died on a Thursday in March, 71 years old, in a house she'd walked into once with her brother's blood on her sleeve. Ethan was 83 and outlived her by 9 months, which everybody had known he would and nobody had wanted to say. They found the box in her room, where it had been for 44 years. 31 letters and a strip of paper an inch wide with a razor cut across it, and a marriage license from 1857, and 1 gold coin she had knocked onto the floor of Hobson's General Store in front of 11 people on the coldest morning of her life. There was a note in her hand on top of it. It said, "Toby, the coin's yours. Tell it right this once. He didn't buy me. He asked and I said no, and then I said yes, and the yes was mine. That's the whole story, and it's the only thing I ever owned." They put them in the ground on the ridge where a woman had stopped a horse in 1875 and stopped breathing and said, "Who are you?" And the words they cut into that stone weren't about the acres or the cattle or the name that ran 19,000 acres and half a county. They said, "A legacy is not the land you leave. It is the lives you change." And every soul in that valley knew it was true because every one of them was standing on the proof.